I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, everyone, pull back.
Evan, am I good?
A little bit. Take one step backwards. And everyone, get closer to the middle. Squeeze in together.
Yeah, okay.
The sooner we get this done, the sooner we can get started, the sooner we finish.
All right, ready? 3, 2, 1.
Don't move.
Do you see my earrings?
All right, what's up? Awesome. All right. Thank you.
Evan. Still got it. There's so much traffic, so much more. I really
Someone knows. Someone understands. See, that's the energy, right? That's what underneath this room. Thank you, Sarah.
All right, everyone. We're going to get going today. Call to order at 6:35 p.m. First up on the docket, we're going to have the university CFO, Scott Jordan, come and present the university budget. We really appreciate him being here. Thank you so much. Nope, you're all set.
Hi everybody, can you hear me all right? I find it really
really hard to speak to is the screen that's behind me, so I'm going to move around a little bit. So this is I'm Scott Jordan, I'm the university's Chief Financial Officer. This is a presentation I did at the University Senate 3 weeks ago now? I think it was about 3 weeks ago. I know I come here usually once a year. I think it's often in the spring, but I wanted to make sure I was asked, and I'm happy to share with you all the financial situation of the university. UConn operates on a state fiscal year. I'm probably talking to the right group here. I usually have to explain, but my guess is some of you have government experience. The state of Connecticut operates on a July 1st to June 30th fiscal year. So I'm a little off cycle. What I'm going to talk to you about tonight is the budget, how fiscal 19 ended. That was the year that ended last summer. And the budget that the university's Board of Trustees approved for the current year, which is we're about halfway through right now. I will also talk about some of the key drivers in the university's budget. That is the things that affect the university's financial power. Yeah, I think that sums it up. If we have a little bit of time, I do want to mention that UConn actually operates two separate budgets. We have an operating budget, which is tuition and state dollars and fees and all the the money that comes in every year to pay the bills. And we also have a capital budget. That's a separate budget that pays for the construction of buildings on campus, and that is mostly funded by the state through state bond issuances. Can everybody see that? That's a little hard to see. And I can't talk very well. Does this one work?
Yeah.
I've been talking all day. We have a board meeting today.
No, you should switch it
All right. I know this isn't hard. It's sometimes hard for me. So this is fiscal 19. We ended the fiscal year that just ended last June. And I won't walk through every line item on this, but I'll say we ended with a slight positive balance with $6.5 million at the end of the year against a $1.3 billion budget for the overall. Biggest issues for us, and you'll see this as a theme throughout my slides, the block grant from the state. The state gives us about roughly $200 million a year to operate the university. About even, it went up 2.1% last year. Fringe, but I talk all day long about fringe benefits. I wish I could just stop. UConn employees are state employees. State employees get state health insurance and they get a state pension. UConn employees, most of them get to choose between a state pension and an alternative retirement program, which is like a 401k. Does that everybody know what a 401k is? It's a retirement account that you save money tax-free in until you retire. The state pension system has a lot of issues with it, namely that it's not funded. The state has made promises to its employees that it never set money aside for. And under accounting rules now, it didn't used to be this way, but now, states have to start setting money aside. This is actually not start. This has been a rule for a long time. The state of Connecticut has a long way to go to catch up, and they are putting money away like crazy towards state pensions. But what that means to UConn is that the amount the state charges us for fringe benefits for our employees is higher than it would be. And this is a complaint that we make all the time, that these unfunded state pension liabilities inflates our budget. That we have to pay the state for that, and that's why you'll see this fringe benefit line here is $286 million of expense to the university, and that's up 10.4% from last year. Other parts of the budget, salaries and wages. That's the pay for all the people that work here. We've held that to 0.8%. I think that's actually a negative number. Yeah, 505 million 2 years ago, 501 last year. If you have a question in your mind, you say, "Gee, Scott, what are you doing to save money at UConn and get all this tuition and you're telling me things are getting more expensive?" The things we can control are the number of employees that work here And we are doing a good job of at least keeping that under control. And we can offer more financial aid. You can see up 10.6% last year. So we are doing the things that we can to keep our costs down and to try to keep it more affordable for you. I have a question.
How are you? Can we go back to the last slide real quick?
Yeah.
So with this 6.5 million for, just general, the bottom line gains,
Yes.
are those used to offset past losses? Are they reinvested into future budgets? And if so, specific areas?
We have not had past losses, at least over the last several years. I have to say since I've been here, but probably before me too. This is pretty much how it's been. We've had small gains each year. But we mostly put this money towards, and it's not a lot of money. And I think I have another slide that will show it. Let's see. This is a very simplified presentation. When we have a little money left at the end of the year, we fix things for the most part. There's what we call deferred maintenance, small projects all over campus. Leaks, mostly leaks, roofs, and that kind of thing. And then we sock a little bit of it away. We don't have reserves or big endowment, but we do have a little bit of money that we set aside. It's not for past losses, but if we need it in the future. So this is where the money comes from, and I'm going to point out a couple of important things. And I'm not going to talk numbers, I'll just talk pie. UConn gets almost 31% of our money comes from tuition, from dollars that you spend here. In these charts, we show tuition as a gross number, that's before financial aid, then we treat financial aid as an expense, so you'll see an offset on the financial aid charts. 10% fees, that's mostly the GUF, the IMF, that's the infrastructure maintenance fee, and I think the rec fee is in there too. Auxiliary enterprise revenue, that's what we call room and board. Room, board, parking, athletics, those we treat as, we call them auxiliary enterprises. What we really mean is they're like their own little business within the university. We try to keep that money. When you pay room and board, you're paying for food and housing, and we spend that money on food and housing, so we keep that separate. But what's important here is all these light blue slices to the pie. That's mostly coming from students, and honestly mostly from undergraduate students. 56% of the university's revenue. 25% is state support. So when we talk about needing the state support, it's about 25% total, and that's getting smaller. The story of public higher education in the U.S. is back when I was a student in the late 80s, states paid about 50-50. About 50% of the cost of their colleges, and students paid about half. Before that, there were times when I grew up in New York State and friends in California. New York and California sort of led the way with almost no tuition at their public universities. California was kind of famous for not having, if you were a resident, you didn't pay tuition. It was sort of like in high school. You paid for room and board, but you didn't pay tuition. And there's been a steady erosion of public support as a share of the cost of public higher ed since those days. And now we're at about, across the entire university, we're about 25% state support. When we think about the support that the state provides to the University of Connecticut versus, we've done some calculation on the actual cost of education on a per undergraduate basis, it's about 60-40. So you're paying for about 60%. If you're a Connecticut resident, the state's paying about 40%. It's just sort of a different way of looking at it. When we also look at our revenue, the other thing I would like to point out to you is that little tiny orange slice in the corner of foundation. Anybody here familiar with how private universities run versus publics? We've heard of endowments. Endowment income is very important in most private universities. An endowment is private money that's been raised and set aside in a restricted account, and the university gets to spend only the investment earnings on that account. UConn has about $400 million in endowment. Harvard has about $30 billion. It might be 35. Like, in the time we're talking, it might have gone up to 37. I don't know. It just grows and grows. And if you look at sort of the elite privates, this chart would show that endowment number, that's 1.5% for UConn, could be 40+% of their total spending. It's a big difference in financial model. And also, this is the point in my presentation when I make my pitch to you. When you graduate UConn and you make millions of dollars, don't forget your alma mater, because that's how we're going to catch up when it comes to financial aid and affordability, is through fundraising and philanthropy. Are there any questions on where the money comes from? Yes?
So I know that President Fitzgerald semi-recently announced the program, the Connecticut Commitment. How do you see that impacting tuition?
That's a good question. The question, if you didn't hear it, was about the Connecticut Commitment and how that impacts tuition revenue. Connecticut Commitment, if you haven't heard, will start next year, and it's a promise that for undergraduate students whose families earn less than $50,000 a year, that they won't pay tuition. This is for Connecticut residents. And what we are promising is that our financial aid packages will be generous enough to offset the cost of tuition. What we've found when we've done the analysis, financial aid is complicated, right? Did anybody here actually have any idea what it was really going to cost before that email came or that letter email came? It's very hard to understand, and what the Connecticut Commitment is really about is price transparency. Is what we want to say to potential students is very clear. Not, hey, our tuition is, I think it's $15-something thousand, might be 16 this year. Fees are this, and wait till March and we'll tell you how much you're going to pay. Especially for low-income students, what we want to say is very plainly, if your family makes less than $50,000, your tuition is zero. We think that's a good thing. What we found when we looked at this, when President Katsoulakis asked the question, is that 75% of those students already don't pay any tuition to the university. That the FAFSA process and all of that already is sufficiently generous to have their financial aid package be high enough to offset all of their tuition. What we also found is that of those 25% that still have to pay something, that something isn't all that much. It could be a few $100s, it could be a few $1,000s. And then when we think about the whole population of students, and we're talking about 6,000 undergraduates here, that when we looked at the numbers have family incomes of less than $50,000, is that it wouldn't take all that much in an increase in the financial aid budget to keep that promise. In fact, it's about $1 million per year, per cohort. So next year's freshman class will cost $1 million. The following year, $2 million for freshmen and sophomores, $3 million, $4 million. So it tops out at $4 million. What we've said to our foundation and to our fundraisers is that this is a promise we want to keep. Go raise the money. And so far, we think they're on track to raise that first $1 million, so we can keep the promise in the first year. The goal, remember what I said about endowments, our goal is to raise enough money each year to keep this promise over the next several years, and to raise enough money long-term so that it's an endowed promise, that if we can put, we're talking about $4 million a year, and somebody can do that, I'm sure, divide that by about a 4% return on investment. I think we're at about $100 million that we need to raise, and that's the goal. So we are, if your phone rings, or your parents' phone rings, or your rich uncle's phone rings, says, hey, can you donate for the Connecticut Commitment? Say, yeah, sure, I'll give you all I can. Because if we can get $100 million in the bank, this is a permanent promise that we can keep. That's a good question. So I don't think it's going to affect tuition at all. In fact, I hope that that we're able to privately raise enough money so that it doesn't affect the university's budget. In fact, we're hoping, like a real home run for us is for folks to be so excited that they give us more than we need. And then our goal is to raise the commitment number from 50,000. There are schools that have done this, and there are 75,000. There's, I think some of the SUNY schools are at 125,000 now.
And you touched a bit upon this, so thank you for doing that. My question regards, so as you noted, the state, ever since the 80s, has been gradually pulling back, especially as the gross state debt has been increasing. So do you believe that using the UConn Foundation and our alumni network to get more money out of them will help supplement any possible future losses to the state number that they give us? Is that number like projected to go down?
In projecting state budgets is like,
Fair point.
Spin the wheel. Truth is, and I think I have a slide here that, oh, there it is. What do you know? It's really easy to sort of say bad things about the state government in Connecticut. Truth is, state government in Connecticut is super generous to UConn and loves us. I've never been, occasionally we will go, and often on the president and I, President Herbst before President Katsilas, and I would go, we do a lot of meetings when they're in session with individual legislators, we testify at hearings, and we hear a lot more good than bad about the university. And state leadership, the governors, last Governor Malloy and the current governor, and you can see this in these numbers, they tend to want to give us more. In fact, Governor Malloy made a promise. Has anyone heard of this program, Next Gen Connecticut? We had a dorm we called Next Gen dorm for a little while. That was a promise to give the university enough operating money to support growth of about 6,000 undergraduates and enough capital money, it added up to close to $2 billion to build new dormitories and new science buildings and really renovate the campus. The state kept its promise for 1 year, you can pick the year, which is fiscal 16, on that. There was a whole schedule of how much money the state was going to give us each year to support our growth. And we hired more professors, we admitted more students, we got about 2,500 undergrads into the growth plan. And then, the bottom fell out of the state budget. And Governor Malloy spent the rest of his term trying to figure out how to solve the budget. And they cut us about $40 million over that time. So during good times, one of the reasons UConn is so great and our buildings are so new and so much is clean and a nice place is because during the good times they're very generous and they give us money to do these things. And even when times are bad, they still give us bond money to build new buildings. So I want to acknowledge that. That's, we do get great support. But truth is, if you go all the way back in fiscal 10, we had $33 million 10 years ago. And that's, any economics majors or anybody even who knows what inflation is. I haven't done the math, but we're probably 10, 15% lower in real terms now than we were back then. And then if you go all the way back, I should have gone all the way back. We went back to the late 90s, numbers about the same. We seem to be bounce around $200 million year in, year out for years and years. And you can see that in our tuition numbers. That's where. So I think your question was, can we use the foundation to do something about that?
Right. There's
sort of two answers to that. Yes, if we could raise literally billions of dollars, then we could do more things. We could do most of it, a lot of it would go to financial aid. We would be more affordable. But we can also use the foundation and other alumni networks to make sure the legislature knows we're here.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that was your question, but we do both of those things. And the state does its budget in the spring. The governor announces his budget proposal. I think it's in February. There's probably somebody in here who knows this better than me. Any interns in the State House? Yeah, mid-February. And this is a short session this year, so they'll be doing their debate while wrapping up, I think, in April or May. So if you read in the paper that UConn is under some threat, we send buses. We do a pretty good job of lobbying, but it's important to us. So expenses. Any questions on revenues? Yes.
I saw there was a category called research fund.
Oh yeah, there is. It's red in my pie chart. Do you want me to tell you about it?
Yeah, just 3%.
Sure. So UConn's a research research one university, that means that faculty here, in addition to their teaching duties, are expected to conduct research and scholarship. A lot of our research at the university is is funded from outside the university, usually from the federal government, especially in the sciences and engineering, through National Science Foundation and National Institutes for Health, Department of Defense. And we run, the research fund is a separate fund in our accounting that is only for that. Its only job is to catch all those federal dollars and pay them out to the research activities that we do. And if you're, is anybody here a research assistant or a graduate assistant? There's a good chance if you're being paid in a laboratory, you're being paid from federal funds here. And you'll see when I click over to expense, the research fund is here too, and it's about 8%. It's about, is it the same color? Yeah, it's red. It's in the same place. So we treat it as part of the budget, but we don't do anything with it other than catch the federal money and pay it out. It's a pass-through. If you're comparing UConn to other universities, you might know, what am I doing? There's a button. I don't know which button, but there's a button on here that does that. If you're comparing UConn to other universities, as I did on the revenue side, it said, geez, we could use a bigger endowment compared to our peers. Another aspirational goal for the university is to be a bigger research presence. Our research program is robust and solid, but against our peers and competitors, it's relatively small. So here at the Storrs campus, we're about call it $100 million a year. At UConn Health in Farmington, has anyone ever been there? You know, we have a whole nother one, Health campus. It's about the same size, budget-wise and employee-wise as this campus, for medical school, dental school, and hospital. They do about $100 million a year in research there too, which is not in these slides. Anything else on that? Yes. Transportation services is on the revenue side. We treat transportation as an auxiliary enterprise. That is, we take the transportation fees, hold them in a special transportation account, and we use that to pay for the buses and the bus drivers. It's like a separate business for us. Auxiliary enterprises are housing, dining, athletics, parking, transportation. I think we have I can't remember what we call it. It's like a copy center, print services. Yes. UPC. I think the Jorgensen Theater is one as well. Those are the big ones. I'm sure I'm missing a few, but there's one way to think about UConn is how I think about it. Is that UConn is a big enterprise, but that we have a lot of sort of business activities happening within it. And we allow some amount of cross subsidy. We try very hard to maintain integrity within each of these accounts. That is, we wouldn't collect the transportation fee from you and use it to pay a professor. We set the transportation fee only at what we need to run the buses and pay for the UCAS program for the most part. Yes?
And then, just to be clear, this is specifically for the Storrs campus and not the regional campuses?
No, this
you
is-
mentioned the UConn Health being a different.
UConn Health isn't in here, but Storrs, regionals, and law school are in here.
Thank you.
Who else? Yes?
Sorry, so what does the state support, like, versus the revenue?
The state support, I'm sorry, I was on that slide already. It goes entirely to salaries. And there's a reason for that. I don't want to bore you with the details, but I will, because it's exciting. The state, because I said all UConn employees are state employees, and we're all actually paid through the state payroll system. And within the way the state operates, any employee that is paid with state dollars has their fringe benefits paid for by the state. So we take every dollar that the state gives us and we use it to pay employees, because then we multiply, we have a fringe benefit rate of close to 70%. So that means for every dollar the state gives us in the block grant, we actually get $1.70 because they pay the benefits for those employees too. So that's the sort of cute answer to this. It's actually really clever, we think. But within the activities of the university, because I talked about these auxiliaries too, all of the state money pays university employees. And those only employees that are on the general fund of the university, so that's faculty, what we call central administration, and like facilities. You know, if you think of the core operations of the university, no researchers, as we talk about transportation, bus drivers, athletics employees, you know, anybody that's on an auxiliary fund, they are not paid by the state grant. And I think that's how it should be. Like, we shouldn't be the taxpayers don't give us money to pay coaches, right? Or give us money to pay even RAs. RAs are paid out of housing. What we like to think of is the core business of the university is education. That's professors, the classrooms, and sort of the core activities, curricular activities of the campus. And that's what we use that much for. Yeah.
What percentage of the student paid revenue comes from stores undergrads?
I don't know. That's a good question. It's most. I think stores undergrads are, I'm sure if someone could Google this and get it right, but I think stores undergrads are something like 18,000 students, and I think the whole system is about 24,000. I think the tuition is about the same. I think there's a slight difference, but I think it's about the same. No, it is the same. Regional campus-based tuition is the same as stores. And I'm backing into a good number here, which is to say most. Most of the undergrads are at stores, and the residency mix is important. Undergraduate tuition for Connecticut residents here is about $16,000 a year. Out-of-state tuition, I think, is closer to $35,000. It's about a little more than double. And the regional campuses are almost entirely Connecticut residents, so it's both the count and the rate. Yeah, it's mostly stores. And most of our expenses are stores, too. Any other questions? Revenue? I'm sure I'm going over time.
You got all the time
check?
you need.
Okay. You guys must have important business to do tonight. Do this all. So I think I've already talked about a lot of this stuff. Most of the university's expense, this is the expense line. Most of it is our people, salaries and fringe benefits. Fringe benefits here are much higher than most of our peer institutions. The state does reimburse for some of it through this clever thing we do where we bill to the state, but not all of it. And you can see here within the pension amount, 43% of it is a result of these unfunded liabilities that we're paying to the state. I want to point out a couple other elements on our expense slide here. Financial aid is 13% of the budget. Our total financial aid budget is $195 million, roughly. And that is exclusive of Pell. So we treat Pell grants as federal aid. This is what we call institutional aid. This is the amounts that we use out of university resources. And then, so that's a big number. A small number compared to our peers, debt service and capital projects, 2.1% of our budget. And that's because the state pays for most of that. Your tuition, for the most part, does not pay for any of the buildings on campus. With the exception of the rec center. The rec center fee was funded the rec center was funded by the rec center fee. Everybody, do you use the rec center? Yes. If you use it, do you like it? Is it a decent building? Compared to the old one. Yes.
Can you expand on the 16% of other expenses?
Yeah. So I can expand, I can tell you other expenses isn't just what it sounds like. So what you're looking at here is most of the expenses of the university. And then we have energy is 1.4. That's another thing. UConn is really cheap to heat because we have this central plant that does all of it, makes electricity, heat, and cooling. So our energy budget's very low compared to our peers. Other is everything else you can think of, from the all of the stuff in the buildings, so like furniture, groundskeeping, what it costs us to maintain the properties, vehicles. The university has vehicles, office supplies. It's pretty much anything you can think of as a tangible thing that we buy at the university is pretty much in that category. Also, services the university does. We have to pay people to do things for us, like when things are broken and they have to get fixed. So that 16% is mostly the stuff that you see around campus and the maintenance of the campus. Yes.
Where would the funding for sabbaticals and the opportunity to take sabbaticals, where would that fall in this? Would that be a fringe benefit or salary? Or
That would be salary.
salary? Okay.
Yeah, because the way a sabbatical works is that the faculty member is paid. So it's just salary, but they don't teach that semester. Yes?
What is the 16% other expenses made up?
I was just explaining, so that 16% is all the other stuff. Like, I hate to say it, but it's kind of stuff. It's like all the things you see on campus that we buy or use, from like free t-shirts that we give out, tables and chairs, all the consumables on campus, and the services that we use to maintain the campus. Yeah.
So then, what is exactly the difference between that and the equipment? What is the equipment?
The equipment is mostly laboratory equipment, and I want to get good examples, like HVAC equipment, like when an air conditioner fails. It's like the big things that are attached to the buildings for the most part. Yes. So the question is, where does mental health services fall into this? It's mostly salaries. And this is a very consolidated budget. We also do maintain budgets on a department by department basis. So if you were interested in, well, how much does the USG spend on mental health services, we could get at that for you. I will tell you that we treat mental health similar. It's not an auxiliary enterprise, but it is a fee-based enterprise. So part of the GOF goes towards that, and it's self-sufficient. But I know that there's a general observation that it's not sufficient. Right? Yeah.
If one wanted to, I don't know, get more resources from that, how would one?
So the question is, if one wanted more resources for mental health funding, how would one go about it? I think here is a good place to start. There's a GOF committee that, are folks aware of that, the GOF committee? So the general university fee is allocated to GOF-funded activities on campus by a committee that's made up, it's sort of facilitated by administrators, but it's made up mostly of students. And each department that is funded by the GOF comes to this committee to get their budget. They make their pitch for how much they need, and the committee decides and makes a recommendation. And occasionally, are there any seniors in the room? Oh, they're all back here. So for the seniors, that you'll note that I think last year was the first time the GOF went up, or this year is the first time the GOF went up during your time. So, and that's very much driven by the GOF committee. So the GOF committee didn't recommend it. They're kind of tough, right? So the place to win over mental health is at the GOF committee, and to get the GOF committee to recommend an increase to the GOF to pay for more mental health. But over the 4 years I've been here, we've done it once, which was this year. Yes.
So I guess I'll take my question in a slightly different direction, and I'll confess I know a bit about this because my mom works at UConn, and so she is on the old the old pension system.
Okay.
So if I were in the next couple of years interested in pursuing a career at UConn,
Yep.
how have the benefits changed? Because I'm seeing how, and I saw you
Yep.
mentioned it with how unfunded our state is in particular
Yep.
comparatively. How have the benefits changed?
So, well, that's a good question.
Yeah.
How have public benefits changed? And I will add a caveat to my remarks, of course, because I'm a public employee too. And while I'm new to Connecticut, I actually have access to a pension from Massachusetts where I used to work. The public employee pension problem is not the public employee's fault. This was a deal, these were deals that were made and offered by governments to their employees. And my take on this is, for the most part, in exchange for lower pay. You know, state employees, especially in the professions, tend to get paid less than their peers. If you think of, I've known over my years lots and lots of government lawyers and accountants and health professionals, and they make way less than private sector people do. But it's in exchange, the deal had previously been, it's in exchange for job security and a pension at the end, right? Well, the government on its side wasn't putting money away to meet these obligations, and it's built up, it's like a debt, honestly. And Connecticut has a lot of debt and a lot of pension. So it's this big cloud hanging over Connecticut public finance. What Governor Malloy did when he was governor is he had a big sort of meeting, they called it CBAC, state employee, maybe you know what it stands for, bargaining something. Anyway, all the unions got together with Governor Malloy, and they negotiated in good faith, a much lower pension program. So if you were a state employee years and years and years ago, you had a very generous program, and that was called Tier 1.
Yes.
And then, is your mom Tier 1? She'd be very lucky if she was.
Tier 2, I think.
Tier 2.
Tier
So then there was Tier 2, which is less generous.
Yeah.
Now I think we're at
Tier
3 or 4.
Yeah.
And that's not very generous. It's a lot like, and I don't know all the details, but it's a lot like a 401k where the money that's being set aside is coming out of your paycheck. It's not out of your paycheck plus some that the state's putting in. So the good news for you as Connecticut taxpayers and tuition payers at the University of Connecticut is that the problem's not getting worse. The bad news, if you want to be a state employee, is that the deal is not anywhere near as good. And that your retirement benefit is going to be a lot more similar to a private sector retirement benefit.
Okay.
Yes?
So going back to the GOP,
Yes?
do you know how much money the GOP handles annually?
Not off the top of my head, I do. I could get it. It's a pretty good amount. I think the GUF is like $1,800 times the number of. I think that's right. 1,800. How much is it? Yeah. It's a lot of money.
It's just undergrad, not including graduate.
No, I think graduate students pay a lesser GUF. And the GUF pays for pretty much everything the university offers to its students that isn't curricular. So if you think about your classroom experience and then your outside of classroom experience, the GUF pays for about $35 million. It wouldn't surprise me if that was about right. Well, if we go back to the fee slide, without turning it off, fees are $146 million, and that's GUF, infrastructure maintenance fee, tech fee, rec fee. And so, yeah, that seems about right to me, just eyeballing it. And so, GUF pays for the student union, student government. There's just, pays for the operation of the rec center, the building, the actual construction of the building was in the rec center fee. Yes?
So the GUF fee is for resources that students can use. I know that students who study abroad still have to pay the university fees.
Yes.
Within transportation, recreation, everything else, even though they're not using the facilities for that semester. And there has been some debate about the rec center fees, and if you don't use the facilities, then why are you paying the fees? So where does the structure through the support within the fees really translate to how it gives the return to the students? Kind of, it's paying, like, as in the rec center fee is not paying for the building, it's paying for the maintenance of it, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I think I understand your question, and I'll try to answer it, and I'll take it in a couple parts. The first is, study abroad is actually something that university administration is interested in looking harder at, because we want to get more students to study abroad. We think it's important, and it's enriching, and it's part of a great university experience, and we know that the way we've structured the finances for study abroad makes it hard for a lot of students. Like, a lot of programs you can't use your tuition towards, or your financial aid towards. Some programs you can, some you can't. And the fee structure, while you're matriculated at the university, you still have to pay mandatory fees. So I agree with you that it's kind of messed up, and we're talking with global affairs about how better to do that. It's sort of a slow process, but we're working on that. I think the bigger question, which I think is your question, is how does the university decide what to charge fees for, and why do they have to be mandatory? If I don't use the rec center, why do I have to pay for the rec center? Is that at the heart of it?
Sure.
And you can correct me if I got it wrong. But we see the package of services that we provide to our undergraduate students at stores as a package. It's sort of like when you move to a town and you say, well, I don't want to pay property taxes because my kids aren't in school here. We see the whole package of amenities that we provide here is driven primarily by student demand. I know none of you were here when students were rallying for the rec center, but there were students rallying for a new rec center years ago, and we responded to that. The practical matter of how these things actually happen, and the reason why it's very hard for us to come up with any better way to finance it, is that the rec center costs about $100 million, and we borrowed that money. And when we borrowed the money, we promised the bondholders, the banks we borrowed the money from, that we would charge a fee and it would be mandatory. Because if we started wiggling out of it, there's no real guarantee we could afford to pay them back, right? And while the fee, and so student demand drove it, we sold a bond to do it, and now we've made our promise and we have to keep it. That's really what's happening with the rec center. Yes?
Sorry, this is going to be a little blunt, but kind of going along that same rationale, because why don't we pay a fee for every single building on campus? Like, why was the rec center appropriated that way? I understand it was
I hear what you're saying.
But why wasn't every building? Why don't I pay a fee for this building as opposed to that building, I guess?
Well, and the question is, why, if that's the case, why are we not paying a separate fee for every building on campus? And the reason is there's sort of a multi-part reason, but it actually boils down to something simple, which is we really only have three ways to build buildings on campus. The first would be how most of the buildings on campus got built. I want to say 90+%, including very unusually, Connecticut does this weird like dormitories and dining halls, paid for by the taxpayers. So it's actually a pretty good deal. We got free buildings. We didn't pay a dime. The second way is, and that's usually what most state governments do, and what at least the last round of funding from the state of Connecticut did, was they try to limit that to those things that taxpayers want to pay for. And in a state university, that usually means classrooms and academic space and research space. Because the mission of the university is academic, and at least the flagship university, research oriented. So we built a lot of those kind of buildings. UConn and the state of Connecticut have done it a little differently than most states, in that the state has also paid for dormitories. And so the new Worth dormitory, STEM, what we used to call the STEM dorm, or the next gen dorm, the state paid for that too. That was totally free. But what the state doesn't like to pay for, and taxpayers generally don't like to pay for, is what they would call amenities. Things that make UConn a better place for students, but don't affect the classroom experience at all. And at least in my time here, that has been the only building we've done that way is the rec center. but it's also very commonly done for student unions. In fact, this student union was probably built on a student union fee, and athletic facilities too. And our athletic facilities are mostly funded. It's a real hodgepodge. It's athletic revenue from ticket sales, philanthropy, like the basketball practice facility that was paid for 100% by donors, and we do use state dollars to pay for infrastructure, and that's also true for the rec center. So the heating and the cooling and the water and sewer is all paid for by tax. So that's a kind of a long answer, but it boils down to we use the free taxpayer money for the stuff the taxpayer wants to pay for, and we have to charge you for the stuff they don't want to pay for.
Before we go on, I know that there are a couple other people here with a couple questions. That's fine. I'm going to say what we should do for the sake of not just our time, Mr. Jordan's, is allow him to finish his presentation and ask questions. I understand that you may have questions now. Please just write them down and wait until the end. This is an odd, I'd say odds are he'll answer them later in his presentation.
So I will, at some risk here, say, any questions on this, on revenue? And then block grant is going up and down, expense, and then, and now we're getting into the current situation. So the Board of Trustees back in June of this year approved a budget for the current fiscal year, which started in July 1st of 2019 and continues through June 30th of 2020. I'll point out one important number. This is an interesting presentation because we took the pension numbers out. So this is kind of fun. We would have, if the university didn't have to pay for these pension liabilities, we'd have an $11 million gain in fiscal 20, and we would have had a $33 million gain last year. Truth is that this slide surprised me a little bit. The university Board of Trustees adopted a budget this year that for the first time since I've been working here was actually a deficit budget, because the two things, the pension issue, the pensions went up, and salaries and wages went up. You'll see 4.2% increase in salaries and wages, and that's driven principally by this grand bargain that Governor Malloy made with labor. The trade-off was lower pensions, and Connecticut labor unions, public labor unions, had been accepting for 3 years in a row 0% pay raises. So it went 0, 0, 0, and then for the current fiscal year, the grand bargain with Governor Malloy was worse pensions but a pay raise. So it's a 5.5% pay raise in this year, which, because we're reducing the count, the number of employees here, 5.5% pay to fewer people, 4.2% net increase. Also increasing financial aid. You probably have noted maybe that the university has raised tuition each year over the last several years by some amount. We try to maintain proportional increases in financial aid. So you'll see this in every budget that we do. If we raise tuition, we also raise financial aid. And that's with the goal of maintaining affordability for those who need more financial aid. Let's say, I think that's, then I could go on and on about fringe, but I don't need to. And this is the fringe thing resonates more with faculty, because a lot of them have pensions, so they're a little on both sides of this. So the University Board of Trustees adopted a budget that was $19.6 million in deficit back in June. And university administrators have been working on this since then, and working with state governments since then. And we've now got, as of today, the deficit is at $5.1 million. If we keep going with this, we'll be in balance by the end of the fiscal year. So I don't want you to worry about it. But we've done quite a lot of things. First, we used some of our gains from last year. You asked, where does that $6 million go? At the end of last year, we rolled it into this year because we knew we had this pay raise to pay for. But we've also recouped $6.2 million more from the state and from Connecticut reimbursement, and that's been most of it. Any questions on expenses at the university? So I think this is my last slide. Oh no, geez, look at this. The last slide, or second to last slide, is about capital projects. We've got a lot going on campus, and you're going to see a lot of construction over the next year or two. The science program is really at the heart of the Next Gen program, and after several years of getting infrastructure ready and building some smaller buildings, we're fully renovating Gantt. Does anybody have classes in Gantt? Has anybody been in the new part yet? How is it? Is it good? Better than the old one, right?
Well, they still have to get some like residual construction stuff.
Oh, there's still.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a multi-year project. So the project, the first part of that project, this is like because UConn is so tight space-wise, we have to move people out, renovate them, and then move them back in. So the first, you wouldn't know this, but the first part of the Gantt project is renovating Montana because we had to move the math department out of Gantt. So it's been, the way this works is it takes years to get this stuff done. So over the next 3 years, we're going to be finishing the rest of Gantt. And if there's enough money, we may add a floor to, if you look at Gantt, you'll see if there's 3 wings. One of them is shorter than the other. If we have enough money at the end of this, we're going to raise that to add more space. So we're building Gantt renovations, like Science 1, we call it Science 1. You'll notice that UConn is not created with its building names. That's on purpose. Science 1 is the first new science building of the Next Gen program. We are hoping by the end of construction that some donor steps up and wants their name on it. So we're just going to call it Science 1 until somebody pays for that. And again, like all your rich uncles and friends and aunts. We've got $24 million this year going towards fine arts and other improvements. When you sit at Dog Lane Cafe now, does anybody sit at Dog Lane Cafe? Fine arts are so much better to look at now that we put a fresh facade on it. It was so awful. And it's been awful. We painted that thing every year, and it would peel off every year. It was just awful. But now that won't happen again. And then at the back of Fine Arts, there's a whole new building going up for dramatic arts. So there's one of the criticisms that the administration has gotten from some quarters of campus over the last few years is that we put all our money into sciences. And at least under President Herbst, it was the Fine Arts project was so important. Every year she would ask, when is that going to start? When is that going to start? Because it is true that a comprehensive university needs to support the humanities too. And that particular part of fine arts was our top priority from the humanities. And then $74 million for deferred maintenance, not very interesting, but super important for a number of reasons. UConn is a steam-heated campus, and we burn natural gas to make the steam. Every time you see steam rising up out of the ground or out of a manhole, or you see Mirror Lake not freezing, even though it's super cold out, that's heat that we made that is lost. We have a lot of leaky infrastructure. We have, under the Next Gen program, replaced 40% of it. It's expensive. It's not sexy. You dig a hole, you find the old pipe, and you put a new one in. But it's miles and miles of that. And if you come here, anybody here in the summer? I mean, that's when it really happens here. If you like walk around campus in the summer, and it's just like backhoes and dump trucks everywhere. And then we have to get it all patched up before moving weekend. And so that's what we did, $74 million towards that sort of stuff. So as I look at, and this might be, anybody here heard of a SWOT analysis? It's like a business consultant thing. It's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I like to finish with this as just food for thought. When we look financially at the university and ask ourselves, sort of, what's the future look like for us? This is the kind of thing we look at, and we think about, and I won't read all of this to you. UConn is kind of awesome. We are in such the sweet spot as a university where we have, and if you're curious about how higher ed works, occasionally go to the website Chronicle of Higher Education or Inside Higher Ed. There are, like, believe it or not, like newspapers about the higher business of higher ed. So many colleges are struggling with this, and even here in Connecticut, Eastern and Southern and Western, the state colleges and universities are struggling with demand. There's not, Connecticut has fewer high school graduates every year, and yet UConn, one of the biggest strengths we have is that you all want to come here. So thank you for that. We had 37,000 applications last year for about 3,600 freshman spots. So we're still very competitive with regard to recruitment of students. That's, of course, what we do. Not every university has that. We're very competitive with regard to tuition. I know our tuition is high, but it's still lower than just about everybody else, certainly in Connecticut. And we're affordable and offer a fantastic bargain. So as a sort of university, as we think of the university as a business, we're doing very well on that side. Weaknesses, diversity of revenues. We've talked about this a little bit. We could do a lot more with endowment. We could do a lot better job of raising money in other ways. A lot of universities are more aggressive with master's programs, with certificate programs, with executive education. Our business school does a lot of that, does very well. The rest of the universities are a little slow on that. Threats, state support. We're always, that bar that you saw that goes up and down and up and down, we're always like one budget cycle away from it going down again, and we don't have a lot of money in the bank. And then opportunities over here, we have a lot of opportunity to increase our research enterprise here. The President Katsileas has made a goal to double research at the university. We think we've got, with our new buildings, new laboratories, the opportunity to do a lot more. That'll create a lot more opportunity for you all, honestly. Our researchers really do rely on student help. Good for you, because you got laboratory experience. Good for them, because they get the help. It's a win-win. And then you'll hear this phrase occasionally, also good for you if you're graduating and looking for a job sometime in the future. This silver tsunami, has anybody heard of that? Or the gray tsunami? It means that baby boomers are all going to retire soon. And they were the biggest generation. I'm Gen X, so don't blame me. And I'm actually the smallest generation. But and I don't want to blame them, it's not entirely their fault, but as the older workforce retires, there will be more opportunity for younger folks to be hired. That is a benefit for the university in a number of ways. It creates a lot of opportunity for folks to move up in the ranks. Also, new employees are paid, I'm the CFO, so I have to be crass about this. New employees are paid less than long-time employees, so it will really help the budget. They also have these worse pension deals for them, better for us, so the cost of those employees is lower. So we are looking, I won't say looking forward to the retirements, but we think that that there's real opportunity for the university to restructure itself financially as the last generation of folks starts to retire. I hate to end on that. That's such a downer. I'll go to the strength. Oh, and we're an economic engine and pillar of the state economy. We'll end with that one. So thank you. If there are any other questions, I can stick around for a few more minutes.
No, the appropriate. I'll go Kevin, then Walter, and then, oh my goodness, there are so many hands. All right, we'll go.
I'll hold the clip.
Walter first.
So my first question is going to be, do you actually think we can double research funding? Where do you see that coming from? And the second is going to be, is there a structure for increasing funding for green energy? I know that the new president has said that that's a priority for him, and where is that money going to come from?
So, did everybody hear the question? The question is, do I think we can double research? And the second is there any funding for green energy? Well, it's kind of none of my business whether we can or can't double research, but I'll tell you this. The way universities increase their research is not by telling their researchers to research harder or more. The way universities increase their research is by building infrastructure, laboratories, space, modern, great space. Has anybody here been to the IPB building in Discovery Drive? That is like NASA couldn't have built a better building. That's like, if you haven't been, you gotta go and check it out. Like electron microscopes and just like super high tech stuff. And we entertain delegations from all over the world to come to that, to see it and to use it. Great infrastructure, and then once you have the infrastructure, you recruit the researchers. And maybe you know this, maybe you don't. Researchers are totally portable. If a Nobel Prize winning physicist at Cal Berkeley decides they really just want to be with their mom in Connecticut, this sort of thing does happen. We don't have any Nobel Prize winners here yet, but someday we'll get one. And they call and they say, hey, President Katsilas, you got a spot for me? The first thing he'll ask is, are you funded? And if that researcher has federal research grant money, they can just pick it up and move it to another university. And that's how universities grow their research, really. You create space for the work to happen, and then you recruit the researchers to come do it. And if we're aggressive about that, I joked a little about the silver tsunami, but we're going to have great modern research facilities and vacancy coming up. So I'm really optimistic that we can. Oh, and about green energy. We don't have, so first of all, we're pretty green now. As everything we do, we be green into. All of our new buildings are green, or LEED gold. The newest ones are. Before that, they were LEED silver. We have energy consultants on campus on conservation. We've changed out, it's not very interesting to look at, but most of the light bulbs are now LED. We've cut, even as we've grown the campus, we've actually flatlined on energy consumption. But to really make the next quantum move, Governor Lamont has issued what he called Executive Order 1, which is the goal to make all of state government's carbon footprint 45% lower. We're at the table for that, and we're hoping money will follow. That's the truth is, if we're really going to make a big move, it's going to have to be funded. Just out of curiosity in the room, and I promise this is not a preview to something I'm going to do. I'm just curious because it has come up and it's been asserted to me before. Do you think students, and would you personally be willing to pay an extra fee to be greener? Like if it were, say, $50 a semester. And if there was a real promise, if we said something like, UConn will take that money and buy carbon offsets. Right? We will be a net zero campus just by taking $50 from you and buying an offset. So, wow, that's, okay. That's so much. Well, maybe I will do it now. That's so much better than I thought. Because I did have a student come to me and say, we want to be net zero, just charge us for it, we'll do it. And I was like, well, you care, but what about everybody else? Sounds like it's important. Are there other questions here?
Yes, so I'm going to go with Walter.
I'll let you moderate.
He hasn't asked him that. And 2, 3. Well, depends on how many questions there are. I'd like to give everyone.
Yeah,
I will prioritize people who haven't asked questions yet over those who have.
I could do maybe 10.
Is there some way that we could contact or be in contact with you at
You can
a later
email
point?
me. I should have put that on here. It's scott.jordan@uconn.edu. Scott with 2 T's, Jordan like the river.
I also have access to that, so
and
if you have questions.
If you consolidate them, I can get back to you faster.
Yeah, so bring them up to me. I'll put them all in a thing and send them. But if there are any you want answered, at this very time.
I was going to ask about the research stuff, but answered that. So you said, or there was a slide up that said that we pay out something like 146 million in financially, or more than that.
More than that, almost 200. Let me say, is that it?
Yeah, 195.
195.
Right.
Yep.
So, in your best estimation, how much more, or what would an appropriate percentage increase look like to literally pay for the full tuition, not the entire bill, but the full tuition of every single undergraduate?
I'm thinking.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Connecticut undergraduates, in-state undergraduates, are subsidized by one way we think about the state subsidy. It's about $11,000 per student.
Okay.
Is one easy way to think about it. There are some universities that do this. Some of the universities that have very big endowments will make a promise that says something like, "We will meet all of your needs." And what they do then is, whatever the FAFSA says is the estimated family contribution, they will pay for. You only have to pay that. Right. We can't do that. We don't have enough money to do that yet here. I suggest, and I think probably as interesting a conversation for you would be to get Nathan first, the Vice President for Enrollment here, because he knows that, and he knows that there is real need on this campus, and there are needs that we aren't meeting. And so, I don't know off the top of my head, doubling it, tripling it, it's substantial.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, let's-
So, sorry, real quick, so you say that UConn's committed to being not just a STEM school, but also with the humanities. And, you know, as a liberal arts humanities student with the recent, like, Worth Tower and all these renovations on the new science buildings, I frankly feel left out of universities doing this. So besides your word, like, how are you in the university going to ensure that liberal arts and humanities students don't feel left behind?
That's a good question. So the question is, what do we do about the liberal arts? First, I'll say that the next gen funding from the state was specifically for that. So we, when the state gives you money to build science, you build science. We have been, I won't say sneaky, but we have prioritized towards, for example, the next gen dorm started off as a science dorm, and it morphed into a science and learning communities dorm, and then we just called it the Worth dorm. And so we're sort of eroding that original intent that the state gave money for into being a more general dormitory. Now it still has the makerspace, which I think is engineering oriented, but could I someday see an art makerspace or a humanities makerspace? I don't know if you make a humanities makerspace.
It's more, I would want students to be more united and have all the STEM students get this nice cushy air
Yeah.
conditioned housing and have the rest of us just stuck there.
Yeah, so I'll add another thing too, which is this actually gets me excited because I care about this stuff too. We have cleverly inserted, you'll hear this from some administrators, we call it STEAM instead of STEM. It's science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. And especially our engineering dean and our dean of fine arts really care about this. And we've actually raised some private philanthropy. I can't remember the name of the donor, but if you heard his name, you probably say, oh yeah, that, because their scholarships and all that. But what this family did is they gave some money to bring those two schools together. And there's some really cool, exciting work being done right now between the engineering school and the arts to try to bridge the gap. I think, what do you study?
I'm a linguistic psychology.
Oh, that's sort of deep into the humanities. That's cool.
Yeah. So it's not so much fine arts as it is humanities and CLAS is being in schools and fine arts.
So all I can say to give you some comfort on that is that university leadership does, you have to take my word for it. Really, you care, and we do fund those programs. They're at the core of university. So if there's specific things that we can do better with regard to the spaces that those programs are in, then it's a suggestion. We want to hear from the deans on that. We did put a bunch of money earlier into psychology to build an MRI machine. I don't know if that counts. That's not really humanities. It's very sciencey. But you can get brain scan there.
Are there any other questions? I see. All right, we'll make this the last one then.
Yes. So I don't know if you can speak to this. It might be too much of detail, but I think the university, the fine art program required space in the Curry Mill.
Yes,
and
we did.
Hollow.
Yep. There's some evidence of our commitment. Do you know about that?
So I was going to ask,
yeah,
is the university sort of planning on doing more sort of acquisitions of spaces like that in the schools area?
We don't have a big sort of master plan to rent a lot of space in the stores area. But this is, I'm so glad you mentioned this. This is actually exciting. Occasionally something comes along. And in this case, Kirby Mills is an old mill building in, what do they call it? Mansfield Hollow, right? The Mansfield Hollow Dam. As you might guess, at a dam, there's a mill. And this got renovated into artist space. Our Masters of Fine Arts students in particular had studios at the depot Has anyone been to the Depot campus? It's awful, isn't it, Jeff? It's like, I mean, it's kind of cool in a creepy way, right? If you want to like reenact like Shutter Island or something. But if you're pursuing a master's program and you're super psyched to come to UConn and be an artist, and we say, oh, by the way, your studio is 3 miles over there in the abandoned mental hospital. That's not really cool. But what we found, we did find the money to rent from the owner most of that building, and now we have legit like artist studios like you would see like on TV, like an old mill with like brick walls and big windows and studios for each of these students. And I toured it. I really care about this stuff, so I toured it with the Dean of Fine Arts this past summer. And some of the stuff in there is like super cool. I just wish it was actually on campus so you could walk to it, right? You could walk through and see the art. But we don't have a big plan to do more of that, but as things happen, we will sometimes. Yeah.
And just a quick follow-up. So is that purely from like donor fund money, or is that?
No, we used university dollars to rent that. It was kind of a bargain. The truth is, I know this is going on and on, but I find stores kind of fascinating. There was no stores before there was UConn. Like stores like Creation was UConn, and that mill was once owned by UConn, and we were doing nothing with it, and then somebody bought it and said, "I'm going to renovate this, and maybe if you're interested, you can rent it back from me." And so we didn't have to pay to renovate it, and then we said no for a long time, and then we really needed a space, and so we did. And we just found a way to squeeze it into the budget of the School of Fine Arts. But it's fantastic space. It's just what you would want as a Master's of Fine Arts student. Anything else?
I think it. How much more time do you have?
Well,
to leave now.
Now's probably a good time because I could go on all night. I actually like talking about this.
No, we really do appreciate it. When it comes to, I know that we have questions. Please do send them to me, and I'll make sure to pass them along.
And I'll get back to you.
We really do appreciate it. Thank you.
My
so
pleasure.
much.
Thank you.
All right. So for the sake of time, what we're going to do is we're not going to do reports. They're up in the drive. If you have any questions, there'll be time during discussion. What we're going to do, so I saw some of you already filled out the attendance form. Please go and do that now. But while that's all happening, I'm also going to be trying to move through approval of the minutes so we can get to new business as quickly as possible and get done what we need to get done. So while everyone's filling out the attendance, we're going to move into approval of the minutes. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes? Last meeting, first goes to Howie, the second goes to, who's that? May. Okay. May. Stay. All right. Is there any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, we'll move into a vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, please signify by saying nay. Any abstentions? 1, 2, 3. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, motion carries. All right. All right. Now we're going to move into new business. First item of new business is a statement of position regarding the halal food expansion. Do I have a motion? Motion goes to Mitchell. Second goes to John. With that, I'm going to invite the author of the legislation up. I think it's wrong. You guys have 5 minutes. I'll tap my gavel like that twice when there's 2 minutes, 50 seconds, and 3 times when there's 30 seconds. Okay? You don't have to use it all. Okay, got it.
Hello, everyone. My name is Zain, and I'm the president of the MSA. We'll introduce ourselves.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Mohammed Islam. I'm the CFO of the MSA.
Hi, my name is Armana. I'm PR for MSA. I'm Marine Pasha. I'm an MSA member. I'm Shira, and I'm secretary for MSA.
Okay, so who here knows what halal food is? Just raise your hand. There's a lot of people. Okay, that's great. But for those who don't know, halal is the way that Islam dictates how we're supposed to prepare our meat, right? How meat is cut and then how it's served. So right now, UConn has one section in one dining hall with halal food. Anyone know where that is? Towers, yes. There's a small little section in Towers. Now, oftentimes in Towers, they don't actually serve halal meat. Well, they serve halal, but it's not meat. They serve vegetarian and fish options, which kind of defeats the whole purpose because having a little section is for the protein that Muslims can eat. So that defeats the purpose in the first part. And also, there is over 1,000 Muslims on campus, many with a meal plan. And to have one small section in one dining hall, which is on the edge of campus, doesn't seem to really do it justice. What usually happens is one of three things. Number one, Muslims abandon that aspect of their faith. They just don't eat halal anymore. Number two, they go malnourished. If they can't get the protein, they just don't eat the protein. Or number three, they thin out their wallets buying halal options off campus. And now that gets really expensive when you're paying for a meal plan already. So we put out a petition form, the MSA, for who supports the halal expansion on campus. With just a little effort, we got over 700 signatures. In the past 24 hours, we got over 200 in the past 24 hours. And we think it's time that UConn takes a step to accommodate for its Muslim students, especially regarding the fact that there are 8 dining halls on campus, and most people have a variety of food, while the Muslims are only subjected to that one whole section in Towers. And this will be a right step for UConn to just be inclusive for everyone and for the benefit of everyone. Thank you, guys.
No problem. Does anyone have any questions for the authors? One over here. Comptroller Sakman.
What are you hoping to gain exactly? Are you hoping to have like every dining hall have halal food or more options in the student union? Do you have a set goal in mind?
Yeah, so preferably we would have halal food at McMahon. Because halal food is not served on the weekends, it's not served after 7:15 on late night, it's not served for breakfast. So we're offered a very short window, so McMahon would solve those problems.
Further question?
Oh yeah, and also, so there are some halal sandwiches at like the cafes, and I've counted, there's usually about like 8 sandwiches, considering there's like 1,000 Muslims on campus. It also doesn't seem to do it.
Further questions? Ron. Okay.
So I represent youth, and a lot of my constituents would like halal and Whitney. Is that going to be on your agenda as well?
Yeah, any dining hall that can do it on the weekends after 7:15 and have for breakfast is okay.
Further questions? All right. Go ahead.
So, I guess what I want to ask is, in addition to maybe moving the location of the halal dining hall on campus, would you think that it would be helpful to increase like transparency as to which menu items are already halal?
Sure.
Like certain foods are halal just because they're not prepared in a way with meat that's not halal. So would it be helpful to put that information somewhere, or is that already kind of obvious?
I guess to Muslims on campus, we understand that halal only refers to meat, if that's what you're saying, and like all other things like vegetarian and fish options are permissible for Muslims. So I guess if we were to say like this meat has been prepared in the halal way, that would be more safe.
This is more for just curiosity. If you were able to do so to have McMahon and have the halal food
So the way halal is that you would get like halal, like raw halal meat from a halal meat vendor, right? Because they recite a special prayer and they cut it in a specific way. And then the meat would have to be separate from other non-halal meats, maybe in like a separate part of the kitchen. It doesn't have to be huge, it just needs to be cooked with separate utensils, and it would be efficient.
Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. So, in addition, do you mind scrolling down just for a little bit here? We want to show proper recognition to all the groups that are also in favor of this. And this is a pretty wide supported thing, and I encourage USG to represent and support constituents in this manner. In addition, a bit of context. They've reached out to this peers in the past and had some, friction there, and hopefully that we're going to be united in effort in coming to him. And that means if this passes, which I hope it will, I hope each and every one of you help push out the survey, but the signature list, hoping for more widespread kind of involved in the issue. It's really important that we recognize as students who don't have the food that they could eat, and I think it's a pretty common sense thing to ask for.
Going off Senator Wursler's point about Dennis Pierce and the friction you had with him, what are some of the things that dining services has factored into like their arguments that maybe they're more hesitant towards this? Like, what are more in depth?
There are two things. Number one, cost. They claim that it would be more expensive to have a, which I agree with. It would be a little more expensive to have a separate section of the kitchen. Maybe you would have to build some walls to have some more utensils. And halal meat does cost a little bit more than normal meat. And number two, being eco-friendly. I'm not sure what he meant by that entirely. Yeah, I'm just gonna leave it there. That's all. That's he just said that. I don't know.
To give some context about that story, one of the MSA board members was at Howard one day expecting the really delicious burgers that they make at Halal that all the Muslims love. And she went, and there weren't burgers. There was like some like mixed veggie thing. And she's like, hey, like I was expecting burgers. Like what's going on? And they said that they were trying to implement more eco-friendly like meals. So for them, that means like more vegetarian options, and like Zane said earlier, that really just means to complete the purpose of having a halal section. It's supposed to be for humans.
I'm gonna go you first, and then you. Was this someone over here? No? Okay. Go ahead.
Would it halal meat be more eco-friendly because it's like no factory farming and a lot of like not a lot of
So I was reading through the document and I saw that you guys are advocating for McMahon to start serving halal food, which I think is great. Do you think, again, I feel like pushback from dining services is going to be more likely by advocating for another dining hall to serve halal food. Would you guys be amenable to dining services increasing the hours that Towers serves halal food, perhaps increasing I don't know, making Towers serve it on the weekends as well?
I mean, that would definitely be an improvement, yeah. I guess it's just a factor to consider is that a lot of people just don't go to Towers because it's like they say, they're in the library and it's freezing like it is right now. They don't want to walk to Towers to have food. They're going to most likely go to McMahon. But at the same time, we're not going to be greedy. So any improvement is a good improvement.
So another aspect of having like another dining hall is that we have a line. So a lot of times, halal will only have like one entree, right? So let's say like someone has a dietary restriction other than halal, like maybe they're allergic to something. If that venue or that entree that they will accommodate for that need, they have no other halal options at all. So have another dining hall, that would also increase variability between entrees, so we get to feed more Muslims.
Further questions? Do you have a question or a comment? Okay. Any further questions before we move into comments? Go ahead.
I believe the comptroller asked this, but I don't really know the answer. Would you be open to removing the specificity about McMahon Dining Hall, or is that something that you're kind of dead set on? Because I'd rather have an initiative that we can advocate just to increase in general, and then we can specify when we're increasing that, yeah, we'd like this in McMahon, but we're open to any increase.
Yeah, so it is preferable to McMahon, but you know, as long as the dining hall can have it on weekends, late night and breakfast, we're open.
Any,
Can I touch on that? In addition, we're considering a bunch of different, ways in which increase access. That includes bringing, trucks to campus, like food trucks to campus to serve halal food, and including, expansion of hours inside the current place inside towers. They do hold it. There's nothing off the table here by putting stuff, enumerating in the legislation, and we can look at the language. It is, rather broad and opens, gives us prerogative to expand more and negotiate more when we're in that meeting with centers.
Also, I just do want to add that there is no halal food at the union, and that is sad for a lot of commuters who don't plan and are Muslim. They can't just go to the union and get their protein. They have to either just go home or pay some extra.
Any further questions? The authors might say we'll move to the discussion. You can stay up here if you'd like. You don't have to. Is that a motion?
Yeah.
Okay. Motion.
I motion to amend there in the final, and therefore it finally be resolved. Dining services management team to offer halal meat options on a regular schedule. So adding the word meat, because I think it needs to be reaffirmed again that halal is not vegetarian, halal is halal meat.
Is there a second to this motion? Second goes to, do the authors take this as amendment? Further discussion, motions? Go ahead.
Basically, the bottom line is that we all support this, but I would like to emphasize that the initiative is theirs, so the specifics about it and the specifics of where they want the, the logistics of it, of where these students would want this food to be accessible to them is up to them. So I motion to move into a vote. Are we voting on this?
So, okay, so, hang on. On what? So the amendment, the Jackie's amendment?
Yeah,
is
no,
done.
it's
okay.
not. It has nothing to
So
do with it.
what do you want to happen? You want to move into a vote on the legislation as a whole?
Yeah, like vote for it to pass.
Okay, that's a motion to previous question. I'm actually going to rule that out of order as of now. There aren't too many people left in discussion. I want to give people a chance, there's one or two other people. I want to give them a chance to speak, and then we'll move into a vote. But if it continues going on longer, that would be orderly. Is there any further discussion? Ron?
Yeah, I just think that we should all be in support of this. There's a lot to be said about the issues of food insecurity, especially when it comes to access to inadequate foods, inadequate nutritional food as well, and which a lot of schools or students don't have access to because of these restrictions. I just think it's unacceptable, and the state should be doing better, so I encourage all of you to support.
Any further discussion? All right, we got 1, 2, and go ahead.
and we always talk about dining services and how amicable they are. There's actually a youth cookbook that if you're homesick, you can actually tell the chef about that meal that your parents made, and then they can actually make it for the dining hall in like 2 weeks or something of that nature. So I do think it's feasible for not just McMahon, but all the dining halls to do it. I mean, we've seen it with blended burgers, which is like 70% mushroom and 40% meat. So the dining hall does have capacity to make a big push. It wouldn't be a big train. They wouldn't have to retrain their chefs because the chefs actually get relocated from semester to semester, so they can work in Towers, they can work in McMahon, they can work in Putnam. So I think like the feasibility is there, just isn't too extreme. And echoing what some of the other centers have said, that we do support all students. And food insecurity, this is something that is pretty much kind of going in tandem.
Any further discussion? Also, again, more people against French frying, but go ahead.
The only point I would make is I'm very supportive of this legislation, but like I do think that we should be like recognize like what dining services concerns are. Like it's a self-sufficient department. Like they have like their budgetary situation is very difficult. So like while I think this is possible, like I think we should definitely like have discussions with the executive director. Like just be cognizant of the fact that there are limitations of like what they can do budgetarily.
Yeah, a couple things. One, we're going to start passing the mic around. For that, or project your voice. And two, when you speak, stand up from now on. And that's like not just something for this item, but like in general. Just stand up. One, it makes you easier to hear, and two, makes it easier for people to know who's talking, and it directs attention in general. So, yeah. With that, go to.
Okay, I'm not gonna get the mic because I can do it from here. Point heard. There are budget constraints on dining services, but the fact remains that we just had an hour-long presentation on our university budget, which is $1.3 billion. There is room. We will find room. It is unacceptable that students do not have the availability and the accessibility that they need. If dining services and dining peers say there is no room, then we will go to Tom and we will go to Scott. We will figure it out.
I'm going to allow the. Go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah. The only point I would make is, the only point I would make to that is that dining services doesn't get money out of the budget. They're funded by like what you pay for the meal plan. Like that is their line of revenue. Like they don't get anything from the university, and the university like takes their services.
Okay.
So yeah.
Increase.
I'm going to go with PJ, and then I'm going to cap the speakers list.
Hi, have we thought about maybe pushing for a small funding event for halal dining services? I think that would also tackle that budget problem. Obviously not substantially, but anything's better than nothing. That's something that's a food for thought to think about. Helping fund the expansion of halal food options.
All right. With that, we're going to move into a vote on the legislation. All those in favor of a statement of position regarding halal food expenses, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, please signify by saying nay. Any abstentions? The chair of the ayes have it. The motion carries. Congratulations. Before we go on, I also do want to take a moment and recognize our constituents who did come here tonight. We're always very welcome to see that and glad that we can help in any way. But with that, we will now be moving into a motion regarding the confirmation of judicial nominees. Is there a motion? Motion goes to Collins. You've been trying to get one all night. And second is to Perry. I will look, okay, it's a hard job. I gotta, all right. Does anyone here know the judicial nominees? Okay. Okay, all of them. All right, I'll yield to the Deputy Chief Justice because he's probably the best official reference on this point.
All right, so the judicial nominees, I mean, I'm not on the nominations committee, so maybe
That's fine.
applies.
You're
Okay.
closest.
It's Kelsey McCormick, and then we have Eduardo Badia-Koldberg and Alejandro Rodriguez. So if you guys want to stand up, feel free.
All right, these are, ooh, I didn't get a motion in a second, did I? No, I
Yeah,
didn't.
you did.
I got it from Liz, and I got it from Okay, so now we're going to move into questions. Does anyone have any questions for the nominees? Go ahead. Terry Butler.
So the nominees, and to each of you individually. In the past, we have had problems with retention of the judiciary. From where we were in the spring of this year, we had a full judiciary. We are now down 3 justices whom, or hopefully tonight, we can fill that vacancy. But my question is to your commitment. Do you intend, barring any extenuating circumstances, to complete the term until the spring, or the full duration of your term, to the best of your abilities? And we can go this way and that way.
Yes.
Yes.
They did not. Do you all accept your nominations?
Yes.
Okay, these are very easy questions. They're not trick questions, I promise. Any further questions for the nominee? Go right ahead.
I guess what made you plan to be part of this?
Oh, nice. Go ahead, Kelsey, and then we'll work that way.
So I've been part of USG for 2 years now, and so I think it's important to be part of that, and learn about and then
What?
Point of first
Yeah, we're
I
working on
can't hear.
Thank you, Sophia.
So basically, being outside of USG, looking the operations, the organization as a whole. Primarily, I was interested in the position in the case of the violations of the election that were filed by the Sacramento campaign towards the city president. It was pretty interesting looking at the decisions that they took and the other decisions that occurred during this year, impeachment and all that. It was pretty interesting. I was very interested in the overall judiciary. I applied personally into the nominations committee, and I resigned upon being informed of how the application process was. And
All right, good evening, everyone. So I come from a rather diverse background. I'm originally from Puerto Rico, lived in Italy for a few years, and then now live in the U.S. So I've always been fascinated by different political systems and governments. So growing up, I was involved in student government, etc. But then once I got to college, I sort of dropped out of all that and just focused on my studies. So now my senior year, I started looking for ways to get back involved. I'm thinking of going to law school once I graduate, so I'm thoroughly interested in law in general. And so once I saw this position was open, I definitely wanted to leave some form of footprint. And what other better way than doing that by applying the different governing laws, bylaws, constitution, etc. That we have here at USG. So thoroughly eager and wholeheartedly ready to accept your confirmation if you so please do so. Thank you.
Further questions? Nominees? So we'll move into discussion on the nominees. Is there any discussion? Scott?
As a member of the nominations committee, when we reviewed the potential nominees, these 3 were very qualified, and we throw our full support behind them. I hope that the Senate confirms the nomination. Thank you.
Further discussion? Go ahead.
I just want to say, the nominations committee, I feel like you guys did a great job here, just because they seem very dedicated, so hopefully they stick around. I think they will. So thank you. Just wanted to say that.
Any further discussion? I've also just been informed, well, I'll say after. It's nothing big, right? It's nothing. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll move into a vote. All those in favor of the confirmation of the 3 judicial nominees, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please signify by saying nay. Any abstentions? In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, motion carries. Congratulations. I've also been informed by the Deputy Chief Justice that there's something about headshots being taken. Is the multimedia director outside right now? No? Oh, okay.
Oh, well, never mind.
Never mind.
You're not getting your
You are
headshots, sorry.
welcome to say or go as you so choose. We appreciate having you in the order. We'd like to keep the mic if you but you can just hand it.
That's my brother. Woo!
All right, what's next on the agenda? Next on the agenda is a statement of position regarding statement of position on SAT, ACT removal. Do we have a motion? Motion goes to Hinton, second goes to Zagata. Yes, we are, I will yield to the author of the legislation or their designee. The author is Brendan Jones, but I believe that you can, I don't know. Why don't you both come up? Like, I don't know. Yes, it was motioned and seconded. He come right up. 5 minutes.
Hey everyone, so I'm seeing for Vice Chair President Jones right now because he's studying for a test, which I'm sure he hopes is not, it's optional. So here's what he said. Okay, I'm sorry. As Connecticut's flagship university, this legislation encourages the university to follow the national trend of reaching further students that may not otherwise apply, and overall it will lead to a more diversified pool of applicants. The Director of Admissions stated that the current admissions review process takes a non-biased approach when it comes to the viewing of applicants' test scores in order to assume a holistic review, but the only real way to discard bias is by removal of the score completely. The Director of Admissions and the VP for Enrollment, Planning, and Management both gave support to this legislation. Furthermore, the legislation complements well the Connecticut Commitment Program that will begin for next year's incoming class. Not only students more disadvantaged will feel as though they can afford this school, they will feel confident in even applying. I will not take questions.
All right.
I can't.
We'll now move into discussion. All right, let's see. All right. Okay. Sarah's, Howie, is that a motion? Go ahead, motion.
I'd like to motion to amend the whereas clause referring to Vern Granger and Nathan First, it's the last one on that page, to read Vern Granger, Director of Admissions, Nathan First, Vice President, Enrollment, Planning, and Management for the University of Connecticut, supports the further improvement of the University of Connecticut and its admission processes. Further improvement of the University of Connecticut and its admission process.
Is there a second to that motion? Second goes to Chuck. Unfortunately, the author is here, so we cannot take it as friendly. Does anyone want to speak against? Speak against this?
Can I speak?
Yeah, you can speak in favor of it. Go ahead.
I felt that. This is for you, specific. Okay. So upon reviewing and rereading the legislation, I felt that the way that it was written before seemed like it should have been a quotation directly from Vern Granger and Nathan First, and there was no quotation nor sources. So I feel like the revised way that I'm proposing keeps the same intent and is in more broad terms and less of a quotation specifically. I guess so. If anybody has any questions on it, I guess I can take questions on it.
Is there any further discussion?
Just really quickly, I support this amendment. I think that that kind of puts words in their mouths, not one that we can really make a fair assessment on. And I don't want this to come back and bite us on the back end, so I support this amendment.
Any further questions? No? All right, we're going to move. Is that a,
No, it's not a motion, discussion.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought we would pass.
No.
Oh, we would vote.
All those in favor of this amendment, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please signify by saying nay. Any guys? Any abstentions? One, two, thumbs down. Is voting really this hard? I thought it was about as simple as possible. We got one. All right. Who's abstaining? If you're abstaining, raise your plaque. One. Stop it. One. One abstention. Okay. All right. All right. Let's just try again. All those in favor of this amendment, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Any abstentions? There we go. All right. Two. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion carries. All right, now we're back on discussion on the board. Is that a motion?
It is a motion.
A motion.
I would like the motion to strike USGC students as more than numbers and from the third to last whereas clause on the first page. It's basically the first part of the sentence up to and including the word and.
So, okay.
Or keep USG, but
Yeah.
So it makes sense.
Is there a second to this motion? Second goes to Beth. I'll yield to the close session amendment.
My goal is to make this sound less combative, and I believe that the whereas clause accomplishes the same thing without those set of words.
More discussion? Seeing none, we'll move into a vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, please signify by saying nay.
Nay.
Any abstentions? All right, one from President. In the name of the chair, the ayes have it. Back to discussion on legislation as a whole. We have, okay, are there amendments? No? Discussion? Okay. That's an amendment? Yeah. Then you hold it.
Can we review how this?
Okay, yes. So, yeah, just again for reference, you hold it like this if you have an amendment, like this if you are trying to get on the speakers list, and you hold it upside down if you don't know what's happening and you have questions. Then you just stand up and say point. All right. So we have two motions. I'll go with Mr. Spruill first. Go ahead.
In the third whereas clause, after the word Eastern, insert the word Connecticut State, and after Western, insert Connecticut State so as not to confuse with, pretty sure Eastern Western.
Is there a second to this motion? Second goes to Alan. I think this amendment's pretty self-explanatory. I'm just going to move into a vote on this. All in favor of adding Eastern, is it Connecticut State? Eastern Connecticut State and Western Connecticut State. Please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, please signify by saying nay. Any abstentions? Any of the chair, the ayes have it, motion carries. Senator Howe, you got a motion?
Yes, a motion to amend, please go down to the final therefore clause. I would like to strike in conjunction with the Connecticut commitment. It's the last one. They put me in mind.
Is there a second to this motion? Second goes to Reynolds. Any discussion? Close it.
So unless someone may prove me wrong, I
I'm unaware of how the Connecticut commitment relates to the SAT test. I believe that including it in this legislation is unnecessary, and it opens us up to possible entanglement with other university policies, which while I'm sure many of us support and many of us have our own feelings, this legislation is not a statement of position on the Connecticut commitments, whether or not it should happen, and frankly, I only see potential risks in including it, and not a necessity to. So I would like to see this be struck to streamline the legislation and free us of any risks or liabilities.
All right. Is there any further discussion on this amendment?
I definitely think that the point that it can be confusing to include the Connecticut commitment, and I feel like then there should be a motion later to strike the last whereas clause, because I feel like there was a point being made with it, but it was not in its full intent, and there is a lot more that goes into the Connecticut commitment than we can handle within specifically test optional. And in striking this, I think that another piece of legislation would be effective to address it within the Connecticut commitment, but it's kind of a lot of things to battle all at once in this, and sending this over especially to admissions and enrollment planning and management in the most effective way possible seems like the best option in this.
Toscano and Dina, and then I'm going to cap the list.
I'd actually like to speak against this real quick, because based on the last whereas clause, it talks about how the Connecticut commitment is University of Connecticut keeping a top-notch education accessible and affordable, and this talks to the accessibility of the education itself. So the point is to remove the necessity of taking the SAT in order to have it. So that creates, in essence, a more accessible form of education. I believe that this point is necessary to the statement of position, but it could also pass in conjuncturous senator or legislative coordinator oaths set. With that, I yield to whoever else was over there.
I can amend. So if we're going to amend to strike Connecticut commitment stuff, should we strike all references to Connecticut commitment stuff?
We'll deal with that in the case where it gets struck. Let's handle this amendment first. Go ahead.
Basically said what I wanted to say, actually. So
Okay.
I'll yield my time.
Further. We can't really motion inside of motions when it comes to amendment. It's okay. That's not really something I'm talking about. We're talking about this amendment right now. We're talking about the legislation. Yeah, no worries. We're going to move into a vote on this now. All in favor of striking that last part of that last clause, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, please signify by saying nay. Nay. Any abstentions? All those in favor, please stand. Sit down as I count you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29. Somebody record that number 29. All those opposed? What is it about voting today, guys? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 opposed. Abstaining. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. One from the chair. So was that 29 to 9 to 9? In a vote of 29 to 9 to 9, the motion passes. It is. Now we're going to move back into discussion on the legislation as a whole. I believe there was a motion. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I motion to table this? Because I just feel like the legislation needs more time.
Okay, so there's a couple, I'm actually gonna take this as a quick teaching moment.
Okay.
There's a couple things we can do. You can table it indefinitely, which means we need to, again, then at some future Senate, make a motion to take it from the table. We can table it definitely, which means you specify an amount of time, so we'll table it until next meeting. Or what you can do is refer it to its committee of origin, so that means you send it back for further editing.
Legislators.
What?
What's the last thing?
The last one is referring it to a committee.
Oh, okay.
So,
This came from the academic?
yes.
Okay, so I want to refer it to the academic committee.
Okay, there's a motion to refer this item to the Academic Affairs Committee. Is there a second? Second goes to resident. Don't know the threshold for this. Figures, it's not on here. All right.
Table it? Majority.
It's majority? Not to table, to refer. Okay. I'm just going to move into a vote on this. All those in favor of referring this to the Academic Affairs Committee? What?
I want to discuss that.
All right.
Just have the author, have the motion, person who's moved the motion explain.
Fair enough. I actually was like unaware as to whether there is discussion on this. I do not believe. It's fine. We'll go with it. I'll break the rules if necessary. So I will. Just talk a little bit about. Hang on. Listen.
Okay. Just looking through, I just feel like there's so many things that need to be like read through. I feel like a lot of people have disagreements on certain aspects of it. It just seems like, I don't want it just to sound frank, it seems rushed, in my opinion, and I just feel like it just needs a second thought. It's a good precision statement. I just think it needs more time, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I'm going to the president and then Senate resident, and then I'm going to calculate there.
Yeah, just to add, I mean, like, this isn't something that's timely. They've already had the application process for the next academic year already, so it is a long-term discussion anyway, so I don't think this one Senate will limit the discussion. It can continue up until the rest of the semester and even next if need be.
Okay. Senator Resnick?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that where we just struck the Connecticut commitment from one of the lines, I think we should be able to promote technically at all.
Okay. Awesome. Now we're going to move into a vote. All those in favor of referring this to the Academic Affairs Committee, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please signify by saying nay. Any abstentions? 2. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion carries. So that will be sent to Monsi for further consideration. Next on the agenda is a statement of position regarding safety at intramural events. Do we have a motion? Motion goes to Gideon, second goes to Bridget. What? Sumit and I will now invite the author of the legislation up to speak on his behalf.
Come on up. Okay.
There you go. Cool. It's just one of those evenings.
Pardon me.
Yep.
Yeah, no, because it makes really weird noises.
You have 3 minutes.
Okay, 3 minutes. I'm gonna need 2 minutes. Okay, so I have gone off on a couple committees, so I'm not gonna do that again. But basically, I've been playing intramural sports for 2 seasons, both of which those seasons have incurred 2 injuries on that team: broken leg and a broken foot. Josh was there to attest. So what I will say is that something needs to change, and what I'm proposing here is bringing treatment certified, people and putting them in the room where intramural sports are happening. Because as of right now, there's no sort of administering of treatment, no sort of medical care, nothing. What it is and this is nothing against UConn rec people, they're just doing their job, they're following the policy. What I'm saying is, put someone in a room, who can give me a Band-Aid. That's all I'm asking. And that's what I hope this legislation will be calling for people who are able to administer some sort of treatment, whether it be an ice pack, or a bandage, or wrapping a leg, or an arm, or whatever it might be, that's injured. In addition, okay, I'm going to calm down too, because it's getting hostile.
All right, not you, but everyone else calm down.
Okay. What else is in here? In addition, so there's this list, I guess, somewhere in the world that says everyone who's gotten injured at intramural soccer game or intramural sports game. I think the list is fictional. However, it's been told to me that it exists, and I wanted to see that list to see how many people are actually getting injured. We have a right to know, or it can be engaging in intramural sports game. We need to know why
there isn't someone there to give us treatment. And the reason why is provided to me in the past with the current director of recreation, is that this list says there's not enough people getting injured. Again, both the times in which someone's getting injured, no one's on that list, and so that I believe that list is either made up or very incorrect and not representative. One thing I will say is that, I'm willing to come to the table here. People have gotten injured, and it's not our job to make sure that I get my kid back to the hotel dorm room so that he can go to the hospital the next day. It's not my job. It's not even necessarily, So, okay. One thing I hear is that, call an ambulance. Okay. I'm not going to call an ambulance if I sprain my foot. Okay? It's not a life-or-death situation. It costs a ton of money. And I think it's not something that we should encourage or expect any undergraduate student to make. But I can save all the, counterpoints for discussion. But I just wanted to get that off my mind. It's something. If you read it over, I encourage a conversation about it. Thank you.
Any questions for the any questions?
I'm sorry, did you say that you spoke to Cindy and she was like, nah, it's our policy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So last year, actually, Jackie and I were at that meeting, we were talking about UConn rec stuff, and I brought it up. I mentioned that Jackie had to leave, but I was able to continue the conversation with her. And she said it's just, not necessarily necessary, and that it's just not needed enough. People don't get injured at intramural sports enough, I guess, which is strange to me because I disagree. But yeah. Yeah, and she mentioned, I guess people that are playing physically enough, and I'd argue people, like she wants to do athletics, club sports, which recently just, I guess this year, started having started having athletic trainers at those events this year. So I don't know why we can't maybe work towards bringing it to intramural sports as well, but that's what we did check. Yeah. Oh yeah, and I'll also yield to Senator Saris.
Okay, so on that, like Ethan has brought this up, Senator Wursler, has brought this up to the director of the rec center multiple times, and each and every time her reception is, our policy says this, and Senator Wursler explains how that policy is unacceptable and how other students are also upset by it, and each and every time the executive director is not receptive. It happened again at Student Services last week when it got asked, and consistently the response is we can't do anything, but students have shown and the results have shown that something needs to change, and what happens is unacceptable. And the fact that Senator Wursler goes out of his way consistently to remind her of this, I think deserves recognition, because it's really hard to tell an executive director, hey, you need to do this. So I think we should respect that. But also we need to challenge the executive director that these things are unacceptable. Students are getting hurt, and it's literally UConn's job to take care of students. Okay, rest.
There's somebody over, Kevin.
So have they told you that cost is an issue? And if that is the case, will you or have you considered a fee to play intramural sports in order to cover that cost?
So to answer your second point there is a fee to play intramural sports. Every team, at least for soccer, I can't speak on the teams, has a $25 registration fee. And I think I can very, very much justify that $5 increase on that fee if that's what it takes to make sure I'm being safe when I'm playing that sport, But of course, financials is a very valid and reasonable concern with this, and of course it costs money to have people there. But I know I can justify paying $5 more for a whole team. So it's like 15 people on a team sometimes with soccer or something like that. But yeah, thank you.
My question is, while writing this document, did anybody that was a medical professional advise you on this document? Because some of the things like
Certainly no one can do it correctly. Yeah.
Say that again?
Certainly no one can do it correctly.
So I guess that answers my question. So nobody that's a medical professional advised you on how to approach it?
No, can't say so. Do you have any suggestions as a potential future?
Well, so I'll get into that.
Okay. Questions? Further questions? Yes. Okay, that's the question list. Okay. Senator Fiona, and then Senator Gies, and then Avi, Jess. Go ahead.
So, just like to go off of the meeting with the executive director. So after the services meeting, I did speak to her,
Oh, okay, I see, you were like assisting with an answer to a question. Okay, just everyone keep in mind, we are still in question time now, so,
Wait,
what?
so take me off.
Alright, so maybe a quick example of how this all works. We do, the author speaks first, then we move into question time, where literally all we do is ask questions.
Josh,
Alright.
I'm also an author, that's why I was.
Okay, yeah, like that was a different situation, right? That's helping answer a question, that's different. Arguments can't happen during question time, right? All you're doing is asking the author or authors questions. And then we move into discussion, that's when arguments for and against and amendments are accepted. Alright, Senator Shamiri.
So I'm in support of this state position. We talked about this before. I play intramural sports a lot. So my question to you is to build off like your meeting. She said that this was the policy, and was she saying that just kind of like just to further the discussion, or was it like this is the policy, I can't do anything about it? I was just kind of, if you would elaborate on that, that'd be great.
Thank you. So what I will say is the policy that she's talking about is that there are people that are called managers that can give first aid. However, they can't give treatment. So they can recommend two things, in which they do recommend two things. It's either, call an ambulance or walk it off. Okay? Those are the two cases that we're given to both my kids in college. And that's the kind of policy. Not officially, obviously, you can say that, so it's just say, but they can give kind of first aid, emergencies, that kind of stuff, sure. What they can't do is you can give an ice pack, they can give any sort of treatment in that sense. So what she'll say is that they're first aid certified, that they're all good. But really what that means is that they can't actually deliver treatment. In that case, they're liable and not trained to do that kind of treatment. What I'm proposing is have someone who can do it.
Or just to explain further, I was just curious if
Isn't it control?
yeah, I was going to say, is it within her control, or is it someone higher up, or is it just an unwillingness?
And so you can, recreation policy, same as rec center. There are people who can't give treatment in the rec center for if someone gets injured, lifting weights, there's only first aid certified people there too. It's a kind of a department-wide thing. That's to say, except for club sports.
Senator Delgado, question? Awesome, perfect. Any further questions? All right, now we're going to move into discussion. This is where amendments and, Chairperson Douglas, I believe you put up your placard first. Deputy Chief Justice Lima, Senator Rodriguez, and then Comptroller Simon. Go ahead.
Thank you, Speaker Crow. Deputy Speaker Wurzler has been spending a lot of time working on this. I've heard his passion for this last year and this year. And I think it really does boil down to that simple tenet of walking it off and going to the hospital. There's some things that are in the middle there. And I think that we should work to get UConn Rec to kind of bridge that gap a bit. Because I think it's pretty obvious to everyone here that there is a gap between going to the hospital and walking out.
I'm also going to cap the speakers list at this just for the sake of time. Deputy Chief Justice Lima.
So I'm going to speak on this in my capacity as a committee member, not as Deputy Chief Justice. But, so during the committee meeting when Director Costanzo came in and gave her presentation, I actually asked her about the fact that there are first aid certified people, managers present at all of these games, and they cannot administer any treatment. And if I'm aware, I'm pretty sure people that are certified in first aid, that explicitly certifies them to administer first aid treatment if needed, such as like giving splints, ice packs, stuff like that. And she said herself that when she came into the position 7 years ago as Director of Econ Rec, she actually changed it so that they are no longer allowed to give out ice packs, et cetera, et cetera. So it was before her time that treatment could be administered, and then once she came into the position, she decided to take that away, which she admitted was wildly unpopular, surprise. So I definitely think this is a very powerful and important piece of legislation to advocate for the health of students and the welfare of students. So, yeah, that's about it.
Hand the mic to Senator Rodriguez.
Try to take me seriously with all this stuff. So I was also at the services meeting. There was a lot of emotion involved during the meeting because of the expressions and stuff like that. But moving away from targeting a specific administrative person or anything, I think focusing on the statement of position and on all of Senator Wursler's efforts to pass legislation would be the most effective way of making this happen. Although I think most of the room can agree that we don't agree with the director and like what the policy is so far. I think just like focusing on the legislation and all of Ethan's efforts is what we have to keep in mind right now in order to make this happen and make it a safer space for the students.
Hi. So I just want to speak on this a little bit because I commend Deputy Speaker Wursler in pursuing this. However, I think there's like a fundamental lack of understanding with liability when it comes to healthcare, and I am not a medical professional at all. I'm a certified EMT in Connecticut, so I'll speak from that background. There's so much liability in healthcare nowadays, and if you speak to any doctor, any medical professional, they will tell you it's terrible to deal with. And my guess, the reason why UConn Brecker employees of the university are not allowed to render first aid is because the university would be liable if the first aid that was rendered was not sufficient. So if somebody, sprains an ankle and the first aid person that's certified in first aid splits it wrong and makes it worse, that person theoretically could hire a lawyer and sue the university for medical malpractice, as an example. So that's my guess is that's what's going on here. And the other thing I want to point out is some of the injuries that I read online on the Facebook page. People talked about like breaking legs and stuff, and at that point, you do need to call an ambulance. So I think there's a little bit of a lack of understanding there when it's appropriate to call an ambulance. So a sprain, perhaps you could walk off, but you don't know that it's a sprain until you get an X-ray, until you go for some sort of advanced imaging. Some of the smallest fractures people think are sprains, and in fact, I got 10 seconds. Okay. So anyway, I just want to point that out. I don't think this legislation is really going to accomplish anything. So perhaps if it's sent back somewhere, we could rewrite it.
That's 10 seconds.
That is 10 seconds.
Wait, I thought we had
The speaker's list is capped.
Oh.
At
Thank you.
Could I ask a question?
I have 2 minutes.
You can ask a question. No, they were saying cap, it meant the list,
Not you.
not you.
Oh.
I was
Can you
misinterpreting.
still talk?
Yeah, you can still talk.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I'm just gonna rephrase that last piece right there. This legislation, I don't think it's gonna accomplish anything because of liability. The university is not gonna begin allowing people to render first aid, even though that would be great, and I agree it should be done. It's not the way healthcare works in this country. So my proposal is maybe USG can lobby, so first aid kits are provided, or maybe USG funding can be used. I'm not saying it can be, you're gonna think about it, but maybe USG funding could be used to purchase first aid kits, or we could lobby UConn Rec to purchase first aid kits that could be used by like the club team. So you are by all means able to splinter yourself, even if you don't know how to. You can. You can't sue yourself, obviously. You can self-administer an ice pack. You can self-administer a Band-Aid. I think that's where the distinction lies. If your injury requires more than a Band-Aid or an ice pack, you need to go to the hospital, and therefore you should call an ambulance. If it's less than that, you can do it yourself. So why, and that's why the university is not going to make its employees liable, if that makes sense. Yeah, I yield to somebody.
If I could ask you a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
If we sign like liability waivers to participate in rec sports already, who's to say that waiver of liability couldn't extend to the possible treatment of us by first aid certified professionals there?
It's a fair statement, but again, it also puts people, like, at the end of the day, maybe the university can't be sued, but I don't know if the university's gonna look favorably on just having first aid certified people render first aid. That makes sense. You can do first aid in a CPR and AED class. You know, it's very limited.
I'm not super inclined to continue to allow this side discussion. I appreciate it, but you know, we are on the timetable. I will yield to Jackie, President.
Senator Saris.
Out of order. Be quiet, Chair.
Okay, so I would like to put my unequivocal support for this statement of position. One, because we need something tangible to bring to Executive Director Costanzo and other university administrators who have access to this. Two, I would challenge some Comptroller Sacamano's comments as student health services administers treatment, athletic trainers administer treatment, intramurals as Deputy Chief Justice Nima said, we sign liability waivers, and the logistics of how this program would work is up to the Executive Director. As fee paying undergraduates, it is up to the programs and their directors to keep us safe. It is not up to undergraduate student government to say, here's exactly how you do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's the Executive Director's job. Our job is to say, this is unacceptable that students are getting hurt. You need to do something. We don't have to talk about logistics or liability at the university. That's their job. That's what they get paid for. So, this statement of position is used to talk to the Executive Director about what students want and what students need. And this becomes a tool for all of us as advocates to have legitimacy behind what we're saying. That's what a statement of position does. And I really would challenge us to look away from challenging the logistics of initiatives and the logistics of statement of positions, because we literally pay Executive Director Costanzo $170,000 a year. She can go figure it out, and so can the rest of others. And I'm not targeting just Costanzo. She has a whole staff. She has like 20 people who work under her. It's their job to figure out intramural sports, and it's their manager's job to figure out the logistics of taking care of students.
All right, President Doctor, and then we're moving to a vote.
Yeah, just following some of Jackie's, Senator Sarah's same sentiments. It's never the right solution to say that nothing is impossible, because we've done a lot more with a lot less. So whenever we're considering legislation, even with this, you always have to say, what can you do, what can we change? Because negating it right off the bat isn't going to help anyone. So this is one step towards a discussion to then make change happen. So that's all I wanted to say.
All right. I'm going to end debate. Before I do, Senator Whistler just wanted to say quickly.
I just want to, I don't want any, confusion here. This was a joint effort, not just myself. With Senator Athena and the new Transportation Recreation Committee. We work really closely with that, so I appreciate her work as well. I want to make sure that's well represented.
Before we move into a vote, I also just want to say I find it really amusing that UConn's Rex advice essentially amounts to the same thing that my dad used to say to me whenever I had baseball or played Little League. But all that aside, actually, would say rub some dirt on it, which is I think a thing that only baseball players do. But
definitely makes it worse.
At this point, I'm going to move into a vote. All those in favor of this legislation, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, signify by saying nay. Any abstentions? 1, 2, 3. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion carries. Also, I want to quickly recognize the fact that Parliamentarian Lau stepped up to chair what and Deputy Speaker Whistler is an author, so he couldn't, but that is much appreciated. Statement of position regarding music stop for red and silver lines. Do we have a motion? Motion goes to Mosley, second goes to Grover. Well, we haven't even gotten to the author yet, so it will be appropriate at a point, I promise. I will invite the authors, all right, the author, come up and speak on his behalf.
Hey guys, my name is Katie and I am a freshman center for Buckley Shippey. So I'm interested in this idea to add the music stop, the red and silver lines. It was actually an idea presented by one of my constituents. So for those of you who don't know, currently the only line that stops at the music stop is the Weekend 2 line. And for those of you who don't know where that stop is at the intersection of Mansfield Road and Stores Road. So the big intersection that's near Oaks and Buckley and Shippey. Since the silver and red lines make up 28% of regularly used bus lines, and they don't stop at the music stop, we think that inhibits convenient access to Buckley Shippey, but more importantly, it inhibits convenient access to the Fine Arts Complex. So students who wish to get off at the music stop on weekdays have to either wait for the red and silver lines to make their loop around Store Center, which is silver, or Mansfield Apartments, which is red, and then get off at Buckley, or they can get up at Arcona and walk to the Fine Arts Complex. Since the music stop is on the same side as the right-hand turn lane, which is where the bus needs to be in order to go to Store Center, I feel like adding this stop wouldn't pose a safety risk or add much time to the current route. Simply put, in this bill, USG is asking Transportation Services to add the existing music stop to the red and silver compliance bus routes. So I spoke with a few people. I spoke with Transportation Services, and an individual there, Mr. Dwight Atherton, I believe, said we avoid using the music stop when designing our weekday service routes in order to accommodate the operational needs of the school. He then suggested I speak with Ms. Colleen Bridgman, who is the Chief Operating Officer of the School of Fine Arts, and her response to me said, the School of Fine Arts Administration is in full support of USG's bus proposal and recommend that Transportation Services implement this change. So I urge all of you to vote in favor of this statement of position so we can make a change that would benefit students in my constituency, but also students who utilize the Fine Arts Complex.
Thank you. Any questions? Before we go on, Stuart, was that a motion to like captivate or something like that, or was that a motion regarding this specifically?
It was for unanimous consent.
It occurred to me as I cut you off that like it may have been about something else. I'm gonna motion to do this by unanimous consent. Does anyone object? Is that an objection? Okay. All right, then we're not gonna do it by unanimous consent. We're going to move into questions at this time. Don't leave this.
I was just curious, did you or anyone working this talk to parking services?
Stand up.
Did you talk to parking services at all about this proposal yet? Or is this like the first time it's going to be public? I was just wondering.
Parking services?
Yeah, or transportation and parking.
I know transportation.
That's Dwight.
That's Dwight, yeah.
You talked to them?
Yes, so yeah. Dwight was first friend.
And did they say anything?
Yeah, so Dwight said, I can quote him, he said, we avoid using the music stop when designing our weekday service routes in order to accommodate the operational needs of the school. So he recommended I talk to the Fine Arts Chief Operating Officer to get an idea of what those weekday service routes are, or like what those operational needs are. But the person at Fine Arts said that we're fine with you guys, like, we support you guys in this endeavor. So that was our email exchange.
Question? Motion?
Motion and captivate debate.
All right, that's a motion to motion to the previous question. Is there a second to that motion? Second goes to Senator Knight. There's no discussion on this. All in favor of ending debate and moving immediately to a vote, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, please signify by saying nay. Any abstentions? In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it and the motion carries. All right, so we're going to move immediately to a vote. Thank you all. All those in favor of this statement of position, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, please signify by saying nay. Any abstentions? In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Motion carries. Congratulations. Also at this point, at 9:30, we are when we hit 9:30, everything that we are not in the middle of is going to be tabled and moved to the final sentence. We're not there yet. Don't worry. We're gonna. I'm also going to say that. Yeah, go ahead.
So it's this full motion, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if that's the case, like the motion to amend the agenda.
To move those other. How far away is the? How far away are the items regarding the budget?
It's. I don't know.
The budget's it's 3 down. All right, so this is going to be, this item is going to be discussed, but I'm planning on unanimous consenting the standing rules in that order.
And I'll just say it's immediately time sensitive.
It will be done tonight. We will get to it, I promise. It is what it is. This is a very busy Senate. I'm trying to get people home as early as possible. I'm going to yield to the president at this time. I'd also say to everyone, not to squelch debate, but do keep in mind those time constraints when you're picking the president to talk on. We didn't get a motion in a second. Do we have a motion for this? Motion goes to Nick and look, I think I gave you a motion earlier.
You looked at me like 3 times and I did
Order.
Relax. Go, Mr. President.
All right, folks. Thank you for staying this long. So this statement of position was written last minute after a conversation I had with Provost Elliott. I think that this is extremely important to make sure that, yes, administrators are on board, but also faculty and staff are not hiding in the shadows and are responsible for how they act in the classroom, especially with microaggressions, biases, and sensitive comments that they might state or they might encourage inside their classroom. So just keep that in mind, as well as be present and show up to marches, to demonstrations, to town halls that we have. And then lastly, calling on the University of Connecticut to make an action plan to increase diversity and inclusion training for faculty and staff. I yield.
All right. Any questions for the author? One from Senator Collins and Reynolds. Go ahead.
So is this, when you talk about microaggressions and biases and sensitive comments, are you specifically talking about just racism or also homophobia, transphobia, anti-Semitism, etc.?
Yeah, I'm talking about everything. Everything.
That should be out.
We'll motion in a second. Once we get into questions, I will favorably upon such a motion. Further questions? Senator Reynolds?
Yes, so my question is more about the execution and implementation of this. So it's one thing to strongly recommend action. Do you have specific goals and objectives of doing this? Do you want a directive from the provost, certain policy changes? What do you see as like the next steps?
Yeah, great question. So I'm hoping that if this is passed today, to send an email out to all faculty and staff, especially this coming weekend before the March of Solidarity that's going to be happening on Tuesday, which all of you should go to, just so they know that this is where we stand as representatives of the undergraduate population and that they should come to the march on Tuesday. So I'm going to hopefully see if I can send this out this weekend as president of the student body. And then I will be bringing this also to Provost Elliott, corresponding to our previous conversations. Brett was there as well. And I'm hoping that this really shows that it is a problem and that many students are in support of faculty and staff changing their language in the classroom. So ongoing discussions with the provost and then sending this email to faculty and staff and then promoting more diversity and inclusion training as well as more people of color, especially Black faculty members within our population members.
Further questions? Senator Allen?
Yeah, my question actually relates specifically to what you just said about diversity and inclusion training. Do you have any ideas of like what that would consist of, and like what would the timeline for that be? Like, would we strive to implement that by the spring, by next fall?
Yeah, great question. So right now the training with faculty is inadequate, and they have to do it either when they start their time here at UConn, or they have to do it bi-weekly or every 5 years. So it's very inadequate. I'm hoping that we are able to implement a training with the provost for the fall of 2020 that, first of all, it makes everyone do it every single year, and you have to do it to work, basically. I know sexual harassment training is required by all faculty members per year, I believe, and so if this can also be required per year, I think that is my ultimate goal.
Point of information,
Just should have a question.
I guess so. You said bi-weekly or every 5 years?
I'm sorry, I meant bi-yearly.
Okay.
Not bi-yearly.
That's fine.
Sorry.
Further questions?
Bi-yearly, or every 5 years.
Any further questions? No. Now we'll move into discussion. Any discussion? We have an amendment. I'll yield to the Senator Collins first. Scroll to the top.
Like, I think it's good for the first whereas statement to focus on, especially Black students, because that is what happened recently, and it should be noted that this was specifically targeted Black students. But if you're talking about including like microaggressions, biases, etc., against everyone, I think you should include another clause or something that says that like USG supports like students of all identities and stands in solidarity with them as well. I think like so what Kenya like this should be gone back to. So it's just seems very hasty and more could be put into better than it is.
Sure, definitely I understand where you're coming from, but the whereas was talking specifically about the events that are happening recently that have brought a lot of these conversations in place. And I wanted to kind of concentrate on why this was written in the first place, which is because of the racial injustice towards Black students specifically. I think that the therefore clauses generalizes microaggressions in general, so I don't think that's necessary in my opinion.
Yeah, I also will clarify that like the part that like the action items are always the therefore clauses, but if you would like to make that motion, what you would like to add a whereas clause, or if you would like, you can withdraw. Go. Is that more? Okay. Is that a discussion or a question?
Yes.
A question. How about a different?
No, actually.
Okay. I'm gonna yield to Senator Howard for a motion.
Alright, so I motion to amend to remove the recent from the first whereas clause that simply leads to racial injustice on campus has impacted many students. I also, in the same amendment for the sake of time, would like to, in the second therefore be resolved clause, the grammatical fidelity, the grammatical fidelity of this will have to be discussed. But we are asking faculty to join in these events, and I'd like to amend that, strike that portion of it, specifically asking them to join in these political events. So perhaps, yeah, as well, yeah. Actually, maybe
So just
say
as well as join these events. To respect those who may be demonstrating.
in solidarity whenever.
Yeah. So everything from events on over to as well. As well. Is there a second for that motion? Second. Seconded by Frank. Taking this friendly.
I just want to ask why you make these amendments.
So for the first one, I don't believe we should limit the scope of this to just the recent, because racial injustice is always going to impact people, and any instance of racial injustice is further evidence of like a need for this. As to like the second half of it, I believe it's improper to ask anyone to participate in a political activity, whether it be a march or an event, and yeah, I believe it's inappropriate.
I'm gonna assume you take it as not friendly. Because if we're gonna move into discussion on it, let's move into discussion on it. But taking it as friendly means that like.
I don't take that as
Okay. All right. Now we're gonna move into discussion. I'm gonna allow the author of the proposer of the motion and the president to speak, and then we're gonna move into a vote.
Wait, point of information.
Yeah.
Are we discussing both the removal of recent and the other one?
Yeah, he made one motion that does both those things. Yes.
Because those seem different, could a senator move to divide the question to debate each separately and vote on each as a separate motion?
I vote to the
All right, I'm gonna motion to divide the question by unanimous consent, because we're not gonna get down to another motion at this time. So now, we're gonna address two separate things. The amendment on the top regarding recent, do you take that as read?
I do not.
Okay, then we're gonna have a discussion with the proposer of the motion is going to speak, and the president, and then we're gonna vote. And we'll do the same thing for the others.
So in keeping the recent racial injustice on campus, it is implied, not really implied to me, but it's outright stated, given the grammar of the statement, that what has prompted this statement of position is only recent events, whereas we know that racial injustice is occurring on this campus, has occurred, it is occurring, and unfortunately, it will occur, hopefully less and less as time goes on, but it sort of undermines the past experiences of students, and it undermines their future experiences, essentially saying that the statement of position was not necessary until recent events. The scope of this deserves to be wider, and frankly, this should have been done a long time ago. We, as a body, did not need recent events to prompt this statement of position to be made. So I would like to make that clear to our constituents that we are not just concerned with recent events.
Speakers list is captain, please.
Not speakers list.
Oh, okay, you're confused. Go ahead.
Could a senator, in theory, motion to move the previous question on both of these amendments, considering we've already heard the arguments for both of them like twice?
You could, in theory. I would then rule it out of order in theory, because I'd like to. I understand.
That's what I was asking if you would.
For the second one, I will move right into a vote on it.
Okay.
But for the first one, because we kind of heard a back and forth there, for the first one, there wasn't really discussion on the recent. I want to hear that discussion, and then we'll move to.
I think you made a good point that this should not take what happened recently to have this conversation, and that's why the word recent is so important, because of the recent events, that is why we are having these conversations today. If those unfortunate events didn't happen, none of these discussions would happen either. A lot of the racial injustice that has happened on campus has been hidden, has been taken away, no one talks about it. But because of what happened through social media is why we're here today and why we're talking about it. So I think the word reset is extremely important because of that case.
At this, I'm going to captivate and move into a vote. All those in favor of removing the word recent, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, please signify by saying nay.
Nay.
Division.
All right, all those in favor, please stand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 19. All opposed, please stand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. All abstaining. 1, 2, 1 from the chair. And a vote of 19 to 20 to 3, the motion fails. Might be the closest thing we've ever done. All right, now we're going to move. We heard discussion on the other one. We're just going to move into a vote. All those in favor?
Can I talk?
There was already a little bit of a back and forth discussion when it came to talking
I
about.
don't think I got to say why.
All right, fair enough. I will yield to the president. Go ahead.
Yeah. I understand that no one should be asked to join political events. However, I would say that this isn't very political because as I see it, there are many students who are in pain, who are uncomfortable, who don't feel like they have a place on this campus. And that affects every single person, including faculty and staff. And when students are in pain, they should show up. And they should stand in solidarity, which is what this asks to do.
I thought, now I gotta go ahead.
So I would like to point out that the first info, the first info therefore be resolved clause specifies not that faculty should participate in events that are like related to how students feel, but rather that they be aware of events happening on campus, and that the next therefore be resolved clause then asks them to participate. This would mean things like the climate strike or anything that like, I don't know, TP USA puts on. events happening on campus that affect students is far too broad to not include strictly and harshly political activities, and to ask about anyone, any person at UConn, faculty, U.S. citizen or human, to participate in a political activity, I believe is improper. We have First Amendment rights, we have rights of students and faculty to refrain from political activities, and the way that I see it, the way this is written, for a faculty member to recuse themselves from a political event would be in stark contrast to what USG is saying that we're asking them to do, which puts them in a difficult position of, do I want to support undergraduates, or do I want to remain honest in my own political
No. We're capping discussion now. We're moving into a vote. All right. All those in favor of the amendment, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please signify by saying nay.
Nay.
Point of order. I feel like there's a lot of discomfort that this is not being covered enough. And I'd like to appeal the decision of the chair
Right.
that the speaker's list is capped.
Okay. So you have to. So it would be open. Okay. So there's been a motion to appeal the decision, my decision to cap the speakers list. Is there a second to that motion? You can't second that. BJ, it has a second. Okay, this vote requires a 2/3 majority, and I'm going to justify that. I'm going to talk, and then I will yield to the proposer. I am doing this because this is an important thing. I do not wish to rush our discussion on this. However, there is other business for us to attend. I also want there to be discussion on the legislation as a whole. Now, you have heard arguments from both the proposer of the motion and the author of the motion, which I feel have very clearly fleshed out where people stand on whether or not this should happen. From that, I, as a chair, believe that that is enough for you all to determine that whether or not there's a right to, whether or not you can support this. Now, if you disagree, I'll yield to the Alyssa. Okay, go ahead. What?
Because you don't want to rush this, can somebody motion to table this until next meeting?
Somebody could, but first of all, we'd have to wait until we were done with the amendment, and then second of all, all right, I'm gonna yield to let's deal with this motion, then we'll move. Go ahead.
Okay. I think that we should have a debate on it. I think it's an important thing in general because it's even taking out this portion, like the thoughts that I was thinking of is if this is removed, maybe people can skate by on something, but if it's not, then what if someone doesn't show up, and then what if they get fired for showing up because some things are skewed as political, but then they're not. And I feel like hearing different voices than just the proposer and the author, and I was going to go up and say something about that and kind of see where that took us, just because it's people's jobs to show up, but it's also their job in general, sometimes on the line. And the point made that there's so many other things that are considered political, especially on this campus. Does it restrict it to just, I feel like there's so many other things to talk about in this, and I understand that there are other things to consider, and that we are short on time, but the racial incidents on campus are a big deal, and we should talk about them in its entirety, and this is a structural part of the legislation in its entirety.
No, we gotta vote on whether to appeal my decision first, and then we can talk about that. That's not proper at this time. We're going to vote on whether or not to appeal my decision to cap the speakers list for the amendment. Now, this requires a 2/3 majority to reverse my decision. All those in favor?
Point of order. If I say aye, I'm saying I appeal. If I say nay, we're gonna stop discussion.
Yes. Okay. To say aye is to say that the speakers list should be open. To say nay is to keep it closed. Got it? Okay. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, please signify by saying nay. Nay. Any abstentions? All right. All those in favor, please stand. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. All those opposed, please stand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, well, it's the same amount of decision, and then all those abstaining. 1. And the vote, I think it was it 20 to 19?
Are you counting yourself or not?
Yes, I am.
Then it's 20 to 20.
Wow. A vote of 20 to 20 to 1. It's tied, but the motion to appeal my decision fails. That being said, now that points have been made, I will allow for 3 more speakers.
No, we just.
No, what you voted to do was uphold or stop my decision. I can change my mind, and now I feel bad, so I'm going.
Point of inquiry. Are we kicked out of this room at 9:30?
No, we're kicked out at 10. I was just trying to get people out of here by 9:30.
Okay. That changed it. I thought we were getting kicked out at 9:30.
All right, PJ, you've been wanting to speak for a little while. Is that a motion? What is it? This is still, if it's a motion to table, it's still not proper. We haven't moved out of the amendment. Okay. Well, we're going to have 3 more speakers is what I said. Who wants to speak? On the amendment, yes. I'm going to prioritize that. 1, 2, 3. Go ahead. Keep it to a minute if all possible.
Okay. Can I motion to amend the amendment to something that kind of no? Okay.
No,
well,
go ahead.
Okay. Sorry. What if we just rewrote to say invite them to partake in these activities should they so desire? That kind of takes the responsibility of the whole job thing off.
Okay, hang on. So generally speaking, you're not supposed to make amendments to amendments. I'll accept it only in the case where both the president and the proposer of the original motion are okay with it.
I think that's great. What I was thinking is changing joint present as well as be present in solidarity whenever possible. Yeah? So you don't have to join, but at least you can be there. If possible. That's whenever possible is there to say that if your job's on the line, don't do it, but whenever possible, do it.
Does that, what I mean with...
Was to be present in solidarity?
Yes.
I understand that the way that you use the word presence is to be emotionally present, but present and join have, see what I'm saying? I know you're frustrated by this, but this is serious business.
Hang on. Let's not talk across. I am still the chair of the meeting. You don't need to, all right. No, we're not gonna do the amendment of amendment. I'm sorry, but if they can't agree, I can't break the rules like that. Was there more discussion you'd like to have, or was that? Would you like to say anything? No. All right. I chose somebody over here, Sophia, and then go ahead.
Okay. So, I heard Dalton mention the rights First Amendment thing, but these words are not making anyone do anything. It's simply opening up a door and giving someone the option to join these events. It's not saying it's not even saying encourage, it's saying, whatever it's saying. But, what? It's just an invitation for faculty and staff to feel comfortable enough to join us as it is a movement, as it is an institutional and just national movement. It's not just, it doesn't have to be just student-led and student-oriented, because who knows how these issues affect them, and they can't speak on it because their jobs are on the line, because they aren't serving contracts, because they're not given the space to act in solidarity with these things. So I don't think these words are limiting anything. I think they're actually opening opportunities and inviting people to express what we're expressing as students. It's encouraging faculty and staff to, that.
Good enough, and then we're gonna.
Yeah, sure. So I just want to thank President Thacker and Senator Howley for actually bringing up this discussion. I think it's pretty important, especially when we're considering, as USG, we're not telling faculty what to do. We're not telling faculty what not to do. But I do kind of agree with the idea that this is a little bit redundant. I do agree with Senator Howley when he's talking about this. So I encourage everyone to just read out the first part. So ask faculty and staff to respect those students who may be demonstrating in solidarity whenever possible. I think that's enough language to have. Adding more language, I think making it much more messy, cause a little bit more problems. I think asking for them to, as well as join these events. Again, the definition of students who may be demonstrating is very loose. I understand that there's people who might agree and disagree with different political ideals throughout the university. And again, students who may be demonstrating is very large. So you could argue that's any of the people who were, so I'll just use a recent example of people who were using the mobile vans down on Fair for the Way. Any students who were demonstrating for and against, that gets into messy detail again. So just saying in solidarity, I think is fine. We don't need to ask them to join. Just because I feel like that's overstepping our bounds as undergraduate student government. This is a statement of position. Let's just keep it as simple as possible. Thank you.
We're going to move into a vote at this time. All those in favor of this amendment, please. Were you confused?
I was confused, but I got it.
Okay. All those in favor of the amendment, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, signify by saying nay.
Nay.
Division.
All those in favor, please stand up. I promise I'll be quick as possible. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay, 13. All opposed to the amendment, please stand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 21. Abstentions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1 for the chair. So that's 6 from me. What was that? Something. 13 to 21 to 6. The motion fails. All right. Now we're going to move into discussion on the
information for the speaker. Was this piece of legislation sent through a subcommittee?
It was not. It was added to the as is. I put it on the agenda after discussion. There are a lot of motions happening here. PJ, you've had your placard up for a little while. Go ahead.
Seeing the controversial nature of this legislation, I motion to table this statement of position until the next meeting, if that is ordered.
Is there a second to that motion? Second goes to Senator Mosley. I'm going to entertain 1-minute speeches from you and whoever the proposer. I'll take or the Monty, if you prefer, citing the for and against, and then we'll go ahead.
Considering the fact that we spent 20 minutes debating on one word and one phrase, I'm sure that a lot of other people probably have some amendments to do, and seeing that we have other agenda to get towards and that we're going to be kicked out in literally half an hour, and because our speaker does not want to rush into this legislation, and due to the fact that it wasn't even passed through subcommittee, I assume that there will be more debate, and we just don't have the time for it, and this is something very controversial and sensitive. I don't think we should rush it, and I think we should just table it until the next meeting.
Okay. Excuse me.
Yeah, so as a committee chair, I'm a big fan of passing things through committee. I think it helps significantly with the legislative process. Looking at the legislation behind me, I don't think, first of all, I don't think it's all that controversial. What we were talking about was a piece on professors. That's the only part that received any amendments. If we remember, the amendment before was also not towards the substance of the bill. So to the idea that it's controversial, I disagree with that. I also disagree with that the idea that it's controversial means we should table it. Further, I think when we're looking at what is this legislation, pushing it to next week is not going to do anything to the legislation. It's not going to change between now and then, right? I think that's kicking a can down the road. We'd have to pick it up next week, and we're going to pick up the same debate where we left off. I think because of the way the debate's been going, it seems right now as though the mood of the room seems to be in favor of the sentiments behind the legislation. We just had 2 amendments about its structuring and 1 substantive point. Unless it seems to be going in a spiraling direction, which right now it's not, I think we should actually give this statement a up or down vote.
All right, with that, I'm going to move into a vote. All those in favor of tabling the legislation to next week, please. I don't know where. All those in favor of tabling the legislation, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, please signify by saying nay. Nay. Any abstentions? And then the chair, the nays have it, motion fails. All right. Go ahead.
Given that there's been some concerns raised about whether or not this should go through committee, would it be out of order to motion to defer it or prefer it to student development?
I'm going to rule that motion out of order, given that I'm deeming it substantially similar to the idea of tabling it. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, because at this time, like, it's almost essentially the same thing. It's kicking the can down the road, in the words of Chairperson Douglas. Is that a motion?
Yes, it's a motion to the previous question since we have other urgent matters on the docket.
There's a second to that motion. All right, so now we're going to move into a vote. All those in favor of moving directly to a vote on this, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, please signify by saying nay. Nay. Any abstentions? 1, 2. All right. 3. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Motion carries. All right, we're going to move into a vote on this. All those in favor of a vote, all those in favor of this piece of legislation, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, signify by saying nay. Nay. Any abstentions? 1, 2, 3. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Motion carries. Now I'm going to move through the next 2 items by unanimous consent unless there are any objections, and then move into discussion. Okay? Everything else will be tabled for the December 4th Senate. All right? What?
What are the next 2 items?
The next 2 items are, I was going to go through them individually. So the next item is a resolution concerning internal affairs standing rules. I'd like to do this by unanimous consent. Are there any objections? Seeing none, it is so done. Awesome. Next is a bill regarding an amendment to the undergraduate student government fall 2019 budget. Normally, I would not look favorably upon such a motion, but considering it's just changing the name of a line item rather than the money being spent, and it's incredibly important, I would like to do this by unanimous consent. Are there any objections? Seeing none, it is so ruled. All right. Now we're going to discussion. Now, right now.
Point of information.
No.
What? Oh, yeah. So, what?
I'd like item I to be debated because of the nature and urgency of it. It's a statement regarding the recent elections. I think if we put it off any longer, it's a non-controversial issue that would be rendered irrelevant if it's pushed off.
I second that.
All right. So we'll move into discussion on that particular item. Do we have a motion? Motion goes to Villani, second goes to Hinton. Is there an objection to doing this by unanimous consent? No? Lovely. Now, to table the rest of the items until the next Senate, which is 10-4. I'm going to do it by unanimous consent. 12-4. Yes. Moving into the next thing. All right. Now we're in discussion. Now there's a discussion item in there about funding update, but given we have 25 minutes, we're not going to have a discussion about it now, but it is in the folder still. You should all take a look at it and read it so that when we vote on it next Senate, maybe, if it comes up at next Senate, then you all know what's happening and you can cast a vote. Now, is there any other discussion? Is that announcements or discussion?
No, it's a discussion. So I think I should should say, because of all the minutes, that my reason for voting nay on the statement of position regarding the faculty and staff is solely because of the things that were discussed, the amendments that were discussed and not passed. It's not that I'm opposed to the general sentiments of legislation, but rather I found a couple of aspects of
Everyone,
it to be
stop packing up. Let's
so
finish.
to be so against what I believe that I voted nay for those reasons solely.
I wanted to discuss and I wanted to say a thank you to everyone for actually debating and voting no. We don't typically do that, and I really appreciate like 90% of the room is paying attention and advocating for students and listening to what's going on. And it's really difficult. It's been a really long time, so I wanted to say I appreciate every single one of you. That's my discussion.
I just want to echo the sentiments of Senator Howie. I also voted no on the legislation for the same reason.
Anyway. Yeah. Is that discussion or?
On the judicial nominees, I'm sad to lose Justice McCormick from my committee. She's going to do great in the branch, but we're going to miss her in external. Or unless she gets assigned to external. Just
is that a discussion? Go ahead.
I just want to thank Young because that statement was needed and it was important. And a lot of students go through things and their teachers never stand beside them, and that really hurts you emotionally when you're supposed to have those teachers on your side, and they're supposed to support you emotionally, physically, and everything else. So it's important that that was said. Yeah.
All right. So what's happening? These are all very, very good things. I'm glad to hear them, but they're really more in the vein of announcements. Discussion is more along the lines, if you have anything you want to talk about with other people, right? Announcements is when you stand up and it's like, okay, this is happening. This is like, you all, is there any further discussion? Now we'll move into announcements. Go ahead.
So just echoing the sentiments from the speaker, the funding updates are in the folder right now, some of them. Next Senate is going to be very busy funding-wise and money-wise, so please review the document, the policy changes, the proposed policy changes that are in there already. They are very significant changes. They're going to change the way that we operate. I would say significantly, but I feel like you'll be in favor of them. But yeah, please look at it so we don't have to French fry for an hour talking about it. We can save that for the other policies.
When are your office hours?
I'm in there all the time, but I think it's Tuesday from 1:30 to 2:30, and no, excuse me, 1:15 to 2:15.
Great.
And Friday.
I will.
1:30.
That's interesting.
I think. Yeah, they're posted.
Yeah. Further announcements? Just really.
Yeah, just wanted to follow up on the acknowledgements. I want to thank President Thacker. I also want to thank, for the record, parties I've heard, everyone at UCO and NAACP who sponsored that legislation. And Dr. King spoke a lot about the fierce urgency of now. And I think at this campus, at this time, now is the time to act, not question, but rather act. And so I want to thank everyone who chose tonight to act.
Fall honors this weekend! This is the last time I will announce it in the Senate! Yay! If you have not RSVP, please RSVP. Buy your ticket.
Yeah.
Say, you got an email about it, go in your little email and be like, hi president, and then it's right there. Do that. Cool. It's really great. You shall go. Again, dress code, semi-formal. Google it.
Cocktail wear.
If you have questions, please let me know. If you are interested in helping set up, we are starting to set up at the Alumni Center at 5 on Saturday. So the more people we have, the better it will be. I'm also assuming that if you get there first, you get first in line for food. So that's just me. And then I will personally be in the office on Saturday during the day, doing the little setup things that we can before. So if you want to do some of that, do some of the stuff beforehand. Yay, please do that. Okay, thanks.
I sent it in the USG group chat, but I want to encourage you all to look into the march that's happening next Tuesday. And the NAACP posted it on their Instagram, the image that we're using for the social media campaign for it. There's many ways to get involved other than just participating in the actual march. You can reach out to the president, vice president, or Evelyn, the elections and outreach commissioner. But yeah, I just wanted to announce that in case anyone hadn't heard about it. It's very important as a student body, as USG, look into it, support it if you would.
I'm ready. President, vice president, president.
Many of you probably saw a QR code on your table. That actually leads you to the awards banquet. The awards nominations for the banquet for this coming weekend. I'm going to send out the link as well in an email and also in a group meet. We ideally want to have them all in by Friday morning so we can print out the certificates. So scan those on your way out and you can vote on them. If you want to use your computer, I'll be sending out the link this evening as well.
And on Sunday at 4 o'clock, I will be having a semesterly review meeting and leadership meeting of USG. We're going to be evaluating the organization and seeing how we can be better for next semester. I will be sending out details in an email as well. Some of you have already gotten it as leaders of subcommittee or task force, etc. But yeah, we're going to start, stop, continue with USG as well as release the results from the fall 2019 satisfaction survey. And then next Wednesday at Caucus, I believe, we're going to be having a USG Friendsgiving. You can try to bring food, maybe not, but bring like games, activities, anything, etc. And we're going to have a few activities there as well. So that's
Also
what we're
have our own food. USG will buy. We're going to buy food as well, but you're welcome to bring any of your own. Luke, and then.
Hey everyone. So student development just created the task force for the Historical Appreciation Initiative. We're basically focusing on utilizing, hopefully, the Whitney House on Mirror Lake as a study area and museum space. If you're interested in joining that task force, please let me know. I know I posted some stuff in the chat, but yeah, just reach out to me through group chat or in person. Thank you.
Hi folks, I am on the Provost Search Committee. I am the only undergraduate, which is nonsense. Therefore, there is no possible way how I can represent the views of 19,321 undergraduate students. Therefore, I am currently taking questions, essentially, that you would like me to, afterwards. So if you want a question asked to the candidates, please let me know, email me, and I will make sure that I ask the candidates that. It's super important that I get as much student input as possible. Like I said, I am one of 19,321. So shoot me an email at President.
Wait, could you explain exactly what a provost does?
Okay, a provost is the chief academic officer at this university. They are the number two. They report to the president and the board of trustees. They are essentially like the head professor, if you want to think about it like that. They drive curricula and research policy, and so forth and so on. So anything that has to do with academics at the university is under the provost. The only person that's not is the chief diversity officer, and Scott. Yeah.
So they're really helpful for bringing change and stuff like that.
Yes.
All right.
There's also the whole website.
Go ahead, Sarah.
So if you want to learn about and get involved with exciting refill station stuff, come to the SOC on Friday between 11:30 and 2. I booked it.
Bonnie. Douglas, Chair Douglas.
Thank you, Senator Crum. Upcoming next Senate, we did just table 2 items, and there will be a lot like funding. And I know that there will be items from almost every committee, so please read the legislation before you get here. It will help the debate move along much more quickly, and the speaker won't have to cap debate in the way he did tonight. We won't have to appeal and do all that whole stuff.
All right. Yeah. 2 quick things. Promise. 3 actually, but they're really quick. First one, I wanted to announce to all of you how much money we've spent on the staff. I was going to do it in my report. I didn't. Have reports. It's about in the ballpark of $480,000. But second thing,
Not on staff.
No, okay, so the staff has spent on tier 2 groups, okay? Important distinction, my apologies. That's how much money tier 2 groups have gotten this semester. Second thing, tomorrow at 5 o'clock in the SOC/SOC conference room, we're talking about, like, I'm gonna be in there, working with a couple other people, hopefully, to name the legislation regarding ex officio senators and the Student Bill of Rights. We might be changing the names to both those things to something way more flashy. That's interesting to get people's attention. So if you want to come along and do something fun, like naming legislation, oh, that just sounds, I should have not said that. But like, if you're interested in that, come along. Third thing, I would like to echo everyone's sentiments. I appreciate you all being here, especially so late. It really is recognized, and I appreciate it. So at that point, I will motion to adjourn by unanimous consent at 9:47 p.m.